Very good afternoon, good morning to all the people joined for this roundtable on interconnection of regional grids in Asia. In the context of increasing share of renewable energy on the grid, integration of this intermittent variable in renewable energy, larger the grid or larger the control area, better stability it gives. We have more area where the demand as well as generation resources that can be controlled in real time to achieve supply demand balances. So from that perspective only, India, we have now one nation, one grid. Earlier we had state grids, we made it regional grids, we operated Indian grid as 5 regional grids, and finally we interconnected each one of them. Now the whole country we operate in one frequency, and we are able to, after this complete interconnection we have achieved, there has not been major grid failures. We have been able to have better stability, although our share of our renewable energy has gone up considerably. Now by capacity, almost 24% of the total generation capacity comes from variable renewable energy, and we are have set a target of increasing this in India to 450 gigawatt by 2030. And in the latest released report of IEA, India Energy Outlook 2021, released in February, they envisage or they estimate Indian power system to quadruple by 2040 to more than 1600 gigawatt, of which close to 1000 gigawatt coming from renewable energy, 660 gigawatt of solar, and something like 370 gigawatt approximately from the wind. So this is going to completely radically change the power system, and we need to look at even bigger control area where we could stabilize. So we had mooted the idea of interconnecting the SAARC grid. In the SAARC grid, we have 4 countries, India and our eastern neighbors. We are interconnected. We already do power trading, power exchange. So India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, we are already connected. And in the ASEAN, out of the 10 ASEAN countries, 6 of them already are interconnected and they are doing power exchange, power trading. And on the western side, the Gulf Cooperation countries, all 6 of them are already connected. Tripartite has joined on time. So there is a GCC grid, there is an ASEAN grid, which is still evolving. More countries, they are going to interconnect. So the interconnection of the GCC grid with India, the SAARC grid, the India and our eastern neighbors, and then further going to the ASEAN grid, that interconnection will give us a much larger control area and also 5 hours of time difference. So this solar energy, which is going to be the main driver in all these regions in the coming years. So some part the sun will be still generating and shining and generating electricity. So and also the hydropower in different regions will be able to give the stability for the variability of renewable energy. From that perspective, we have mooted this idea of bringing key stakeholders from GCC, from ASEAN and SAARC countries for talking about this, discussing about this interconnection. In our first workshop we conducted in March 2019, there was a unanimous agreement of interconnecting a GCC grid from Oman to Gujarat with the India grid, and also the eastern side from Manipur, a overhead transmission line going to Thailand via Bangladesh and Myanmar. So we have again conducted different discussions, and all stakeholders are interested in taking this forward. So this today's workshop, many people from the Gulf region could not join, but we have our ASEAN region neighbors, and also from our Bhutan, Nepal, Bangladesh participants. And we will discuss more about the future of I mean, how to next step, how we interconnect this, how do we undertake the feasibility study. And for the Gulf region, some feasibility study, modeling study has been done by some of the universities in UK, and that also we will present. And the other context of OSOG, our Honorable Prime Minister coined the word one sun, one world, one grid. So that concept, some feasibility study or detailed feasibility study to undertake that, International Solar Alliance has appointed consultants recently, EDF and Theory, to undertake that studies. So this regional interconnection between the ASEAN grid with SARC grid with the GCC grid in the context of the bigger picture of the OSOG, we need to examine and look at the feasibility. So with this, let me welcome Sri Ubendra Tripathi, Director General, International Solar Alliance, and he been driving this ISA. In the first 4 years of ISA, he has truly established as a very powerful major force in the world, with more than 100 countries already signed up to that. And also, let me welcome Mr. Lieutenant General S.L. Narasimhan, who is a very distinguished person, served in the Indian Army, and he has Paramam Vishishta Seva Medal, Adi Vishishta Seva Medal, and Vishishta Seva Medal recipient, and also currently is the Director General for the Contemporary Chinese Studies Center in the Ministry of External Affairs, as well as a member of the National Security Advisory Board. And warm welcome to General Sir. And let me also welcome Mr. Mrityunjay Kumar Narayan, the Joint Secretary Transmission in the Ministry of Power. A few months ago, Sir was in charge of distribution. We had the privilege of working very closely with him in his role as the Joint Secretary Distribution. And in his new role as Joint Secretary Transmission, also we are honored to have you with us to take up this initiative forward. In January, Nidhi Aayog has given us a supporting letter that this is a very honorable idea mooted by ISGF, interconnection of the regional grids in Asia, and Nidhi Aayog is fully in support of that, and they assured that they will find money, not fund, they will find money to undertake the detailed feasibility studies. So with this, I would now request who is the first speaker? Our Joint Secretary, Mr. Mrityunjay Kumar Narayan, to make the address. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Reji, for your kind words. Distinguished dignitaries, panelists, delegates from various countries, ladies and gentlemen, very good afternoon and also very good morning to all of you. It's a great privilege to be here in the 7th edition of India Smart Utility Week organized by India Smart Grid Forum. A very important and mutually beneficial topic is going to be discussed today in this season. It's about interconnection of regional grids in Asia. Before I speak about the issue of interconnection, I will briefly touch upon transmission system in India. As we all agree that transmission system is an integral part of the power system and plays very important role in the entire power sector structure. It's a key enabler for both generation and distribution. Therefore, robust transmission infrastructure is absolutely necessary for a robust power sector in any country. I'm glad to share here that Indian transmission system is fairly robust, resilient, and technologically is the state of the art. It has led to the development of power sector considerably. At this point in time, our grid is 4,33,000 circuit kilometer long and more than 10 lakh MB of transformation capacity we have in our system. As Mr. Reji pointed out that not long before we had 5 regional grids, but they are connected at this point in time and we have more than 1 lakh megawatt of inter-regional transformation capacity. So in effect, power can at this point in time transfer from any part of the country to any other part. And this robust transmission system has led to the development of a very robust power market in the country. At this point in time, we have one of the largest, perhaps the largest synchronous grid. We have one grid, one nation, one grid, and one frequency. For this, a significant investment has taken place both in the government and the private sector. Just to give an idea, between past few years, all India transmission lines and transformation capacity have increased from 2,57,000 circuit kilometer to 4,34,000 circuit kilometer, and about 4 lakh MVA to more than 10 lakh MVA. The interregional power transformation capacity also has increased fourfold. At this point in time, we have adequate transformation capacity. In fact, we have surplus. Now, I'll take this opportunity to speak about interconnection within our neighboring countries. India has taken pioneering step in terms of interconnecting interconnecting with our neighbors. At this point in time, we have interconnection with our neighbors, for instance, Nepal, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Myanmar. The existing cross-border interconnection of India with which country is able to facilitate transfer of power up to 4,000 megawatt, about 2,000 megawatt with Bhutan, 1,160 megawatt with Bangladesh, 600 megawatt with Nepal, and 3 megawatt with Myanmar. And with the commissioning of under construction cross-border interconnections, which are expected to come up in next 2-3 years, the total power transfer capacity will get enhanced to about 6,500 megawatt. Further, various high capacity 400 kV and 765 kV cross-border interconnections are in planning stages, which would facilitate additional power transfer capacity with our neighboring countries. I'm happy to announce that interconnection with Sri Lanka also is under discussion, which may come up in near future. We have signed, as you are aware, that we have signed SARC framework agreement for energy cooperation in electricity 14. Since then, we have taken several steps to enhance regional cooperation in electricity, and we have issued guideline for cross-border trade of electricity in December 2016, which was further revised in 2018. We all appreciate that cross-border interconnection provide multiple benefits to the interconnected countries, like optimal utilization of natural resources across interconnected regions, sharing of common balancing resources, resulting in economy in operation, improved power system security and reliability, better hydrothermal renewable energy mix in the region. The regional grid interconnection being discussed here could not have come at more appropriate time than this. Our Honorable Prime Minister, as Mr. Reggie also observed, that in his independence address of 2020 mentioned about the mega plan of one sun, one world, one grid, which envisages a transnational electricity grid supplying solar power across the globe. As per the draft plan, which has been prepared by MNRE, the OSOWOG, One Sun, One World, One Grid, will connect 140 countries through a common grid that will be used to transfer solar power. We are pleased to have Director General International Solar Alliance also here in this discussion. The concept behind the OSOWOS project is to supply solar power to the solar deficient countries. The project envisages developing a transnational grid supply of solar power that will be laid all over the globe, through which one country can sell solar power to other solar scarce country. The vision behind this is the mantra that sun never sets. Is shining in some part of the world. So we have to tap that. With growing interconnection, cyber challenges to the grid is more pronounced. but I firmly believe and that this is something we can collectively handle. At the end, I will say that we are committed to greener and interconnected world for betterment of our lives, livelihood, and economy. I also take this opportunity to commend ISGF for organizing this roundtable on very important and timely topic of interconnections. With such solid and meaningful efforts, a larger interconnection of grid may fructify sooner than we can imagine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much. And let me invite Lieutenant General Sri S.L. Narasimhan for his address.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this important roundtable. It is very much in keeping with the times that this webinar is being held. And what I intend doing is to highlight a few issues and leave it for our thought so that we can take it forward whenever we work on these issues. I will not cover about this one sun, one world, one grid, because Mr. Tripathi is here. He is more eminently suitable for covering this. Other than that, I'll cover a few of the points. The first point I'm going to cover is on the safety of the grids. Recently, I'm sure you would have all seen in the newspapers that a cyber attack would happen on a grid, not mentioning any country or anything. The only thing that we need to look at is how to ensure the safety of these grids. The more you connect, the more you should also cater for the safety of the grid so that there's no interference with the grids that come up into play. The second thing is on the how do we increase the production of electricity equipment in our country? If you take your mind back, the MeitY had done a program called Phased Manufacturing Program. Something similar to that, if we can think about to actually give some incentive to produce the electric power equipment within the country, that would work a lot more. The third is on the can we also establish manufacturing units other than our country, anywhere outside? Can we encourage countries to go? Can we encourage our companies to go out and then start manufacturing electrical equipment outside our country? The fourth point I wanted to cover is can we also create a system of, say, for example, a special economic zone for production of power equipment that could actually synergize, that could actually give a vertical integration, that could actually give some kind of a help for the manufacturers to actually get into this mode in a serious manner. That is the next point I also want to mention is on the competition that such linkages are going to face. If you look at China's GateCo, you find that they have got their own plans of doing this linkages. They have already got into talks with Bangladesh and a couple of Nepal and other countries. So how is that going to affect this effort of actually integrating the grid systems like the way we are planning to do with ASEAN countries, with the SAARC countries and things like that? Also, we need to start moving a little faster on this. I'm sure there are many obstacles to these kind of projects, and that is something that we need to actually look at the kind of obstacle that we are facing and think about and work together as to how to overcome these problems so that we can take this integration of the grids forward quickly. And lastly, I have only one more point to say that it is a given that integration of these electrical circuits anywhere in the grid, anywhere in the world is a welcome step. It has a lot of advantages, and so therefore we all need to put our minds together to take this forward as quickly as possible. I'll stop here and then I'll wait for further discussion on this.
Thank you very much, General Sab. May I request Sri Ubendra Tripathi to give his address, please.
Thank you, Pillai Sahab. Thank you, Mr. Narasimhan, and thank you, my colleague from the Ministry of Power, who has done wonderful work even before coming there. Could you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay, very good. And well, I mean, in the morning also I talked about a few things quite similar, but right now I would like to make a very brief statement about the grids. This is high time. Most countries would look at some sort of investment scenario in the upcoming grids. The moment energy security gets a high agenda place, every country, including India, they need more investment in the grids. Now, I was told earlier, we had a ratio of 1:1.5. So if you invest $1 in power generation, you have to invest $1.5 in the grid connection, creating grid infrastructure. Now, two changes are taking place. A, the demand for power is going up, and B, more and more areas are coming under, grid connectivity, and that is true of, India, which created history sort of, by providing 26 million connectivity in a span of 18 months. And see the impact of renewable energy. Now, any grid that we found, there is something you all must have heard about, merit order, which essentially means the, you buy power wherever it is the cheapest, and that was the, earlier rule. Now, if you look at India precisely, and with the announcement of 30,000 megawatt of solar park in Gujarat in the west coast, and you find traditionally the grid infrastructure investment in India has been from the coal belt to the industrial belt, in West India or South India. But if you superimpose the map of renewables, and those leading 7 states who are producing the maximum, renewables, it is not falling in the coal belt. It is just opposite. So at some point, you now find a contradiction that most of the power generating units in future will come in the deserts, will come in the wasteland, will come in the parts of the country which essentially are not coal bearing. And what type of impact it is going to have the grid system in India? That is one. And number two is the type of off-grid sector, the way it is coming up. Millions and millions of people are now getting solved through off-grid measures. You can have off-grid sensor-based solar tube lights, solar street lights. ISA is going to aggregate demand for 1 billion street lights. They just took help of ESL and put from 47 million home lighting systems of 100 watt, 200 watt, 300 watt. Now, the moment off-grid, takes a jump, and they're equally, smart technology-based stuff, the impact on grid is going to be tremendous. If you look at Togo, and I keep on praising this country for their very progressive energy policy, where they propose that a part of the country which can be well served by off-grid need not be, taking investment out of the limited availability for grid creation or grid strengthening or grid infrastructure. So in this type of workshop or the brainstorming mechanisms that IGSA puts in place, these are the new brainstorming ideas that come. And in this context of, the investment standards that should be developed as to how much we invest at what proportion to power generation in the renewable energy sector, in the appearance of smart technology, in the rise of demand for per capita consumption going up, and most importantly, to make it sustainable transition, the global warming, the impact. So if you put these circles, you find the 4 circles having a core area: the global warming point of view, the smart technology, the sustainability coming in, the need for energy security for all, and the demand going up. So that core sector, which looks after the supply demand side, and also the emergence of new technologies and country-specific variables that we should be looking into, you find that there is a new ecosystem emerging. And this ecosystem requires that we not only define the standards of smart grids at all levels, and the type of integration that we are talking about between renewables and the traditional grids, but we have to also make sure that the grid codes are revised, keeping the requirement in view it is not merely we're talking about global warming and, even a recent thing like Kigali Amendments, which talks about, that requirement of cooling, the thermal comfort for all. The India's, the cooling action policy, one of the fastest, very fast country that came up with a national cooling policy. Now, if you look at the cooling sector, the number of home air conditioners from a few million, over say 10 years, it has gone almost 8 times. And if you look at the next 10 years projection, the impact, the amount of heat it is going to generate, the cooling that generates heat, every AC, while cooling inside, actually warms up the air outside. And we're talking about the heat island effects. We're talking about urban planning. And in a city like Bangalore, which is my career state, and I spent quite a few years in Bangalore, the moment lakes died down and moment the concrete structures came up, the climate pattern of the city had changed. It's no more the air-conditioned city of India once we're talking about. I remember in 1980 when I went there, even in a place like Vidhan Sodha, using a fan was some sort of taboo. People didn't require fan. You had to get permission from the PWD to put a fan. And 20 years down, people required permission for putting an AC. And now we're talking about 2 ACs in the same room. And, the whole city has become, it's no more the old gold city of air-conditioned city. And that is true of the entire world. So, when we are talking about the grid, this type of new demand from cooling sector, from heating sector, and from emerging other sectors has to be taken into account, because we are talking about not only smart grid, we are talking about new investment patterns, new grid systems, new grid code that adjust to the emerging, the dominant role of renewable energy that is going to come in. And in this context, of course, you have to see the one sun, one world, one grid, and the World Solar Bank. You need a bank because the countries need more investment, and that type of investment is not coming. We need a bank which understands the sun. We need a bank which understands solar energy. We need a bank which understands, what is the speed, skill, and scale. And that is the new bank we are talking about. So it is not merely putting money and de-risking capital. It is a new bank with a new thought pattern. With this, I would like to conclude my talk, and thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you very much, sir, and particularly for bringing that air conditioner point. We have been studying that area. As we speak, in India, only 5% of the household has air conditioners. And as the economic prosperity goes up, also the ambient air temperature, every year the summer temperature is going up and up. So there will be millions and hundreds of millions of air conditioners which will be added to the grid, which will be a major load. The cooling load is going to be a major challenge for grid to manage. We need to look at, we have recently published a white paper which said we should look at district cooling systems, which is a more efficient way of managing the cooling challenge. Now, thank you very much, all the speakers of the inaugural session. Thank you, Mr. Mrityunjay Kumar Narayan. Thank you, General Narasimhan, and thank you, Mr. Ravindra Tripathi, sir. We will move to the first panel. The rest of the discussions are into 3 sessions. We have designed that into 3 sessions. Session 1, about half an hour, we'll give a recap of what has been discussed in the past. We'll request Mr. Pankaj Batra, the former chairman CEA, and also he chair one of the working groups in India Smart Grid Forum, and currently project director for IRADE, to make a team presentation on the work which we have done. That will be followed by a presentation from experts from European Union. The experience of interconnection of regional grids in Europe will be presented, and followed by we come to the action plan. How do we take up this feasibility study for the identified interconnections, and also market design for interconnected power markets and this regional grids in the context of POSOG. So we have more than 2 hours time, 2.5 hours time. So the first session will take 30 to 40 minutes. I request Mr. Pankaj Batra to make the presentation, and my colleague Shivam will assist him in running the presentation. I'll just move to a side.
Thank you, Reggie. And it was a pleasure listening to Mr. Tripathi, Lieutenant General Narasimhan, and Mr. Mrityunjay Narayan from the Ministry of Power, Joint Secretary, Ministry of Power.
Pankaj sir, I'll just display the screen. So can you just give me a minute?
Sure, sure.
All right, thank you. So let me know when the screen is visible. So
yeah, it's come now. Thank you. Right. So should I proceed, Shivam?
yes, sir, please proceed.
Okay. Welcome to this session of interconnection of regional grids in Asia. ISGF has been doing work in this field since 2019. So this is the third successive year in which we are going to discuss this. Now, I think it's a very viable thing for connecting this. There are lots of benefits. So I'll just go through my slides one by one. Please go ahead. Of course, just to give an example, regional interconnections have been taking place in many regions around the world, but the one which is most developed is in Europe. There was earlier Union for Coordination of Production and Transmission of Electricity, which is UCPTE. It was founded just after World War II, which is long time back in the 1920s, by Austria, Belgium, 8 countries: Austria, Belgium, France, Germany, Italy, Luxembourg, Netherlands, and Switzerland. And later it kept on developing, and when in internal energy market, more and more countries started joining in, and when the internal energy market legislation was passed, then there was European Transmission System Operators was established in 1999. And finally, all these different associations got together, and there was ENTSO, which is European Network Transmission System Operators in Electricity, was established in 2008 in Brussels by 42 transmission system operators as a successor of all these regional organizations, which ENTSO, the Association of System Operators in Ireland, in UK, the Nordal countries, UCT, and the Baltic countries. Yeah, please go ahead next. I just thought of taking this example because this is the real evolution of how, I mean, this is the most advanced and the biggest number of countries in interconnections in Europe. Now, ENTSO presently represents 42 electricity transmission system operators from 35 countries across Europe. And slowly by slowly, more and more companies are joining in. The geographical area covered by ENTSO's member TSOs is divided into 5 synchronous areas and 2 isolated systems. So 5 of them are connected through AC links. Or HVDC links, AC links, and there are 2 isolated systems, which is Cyprus and Iceland. Yeah, go ahead. This is just a graph of these countries which are connected through grids, through the electrical grids, and this shows the interconnection in a single line diagram format of 220 kilovolts and above, where all these ENTSO countries are connected. Yeah, please go ahead. Now, there are why has all this happened? There are a number of benefits of interconnection. There's complementarity of supply resources. For example, you may have in Europe, you have predominantly nuclear power in France, and you have predominantly hydro in Norway, and a lot of renewables in Germany, Denmark, and other countries. So there is complementarity of these resources, because the ones which are wind and solar are ones which depend on nature. And so you may have seasons, and you may have periods during a day of high wind and periods of low wind. So these can be complemented very well with the quick acting hydro generation from Norway. And that's why what is happening in Europe, because and these interconnections have really helped over there. And of course, there's diversity of peak demands. There is help in sharing of reserves, because then every country by itself does not have to keep reserves in case of tripping of units or sudden rise of demand. There is optimal utilization, as I said, of renewable energy sources, a balancing of the intermittency of renewables by other generation. And of course, the wider area that you have for balancing, the better it is, because of the time diversity. You may have peak solar generation coming at one time in one country and another time in another country because of the longitude displacement. And of course, wind also could peak at different times in different different regions, different countries. So that's another way of being able to flatten out the intermittencies, and of course reduce the quantum of energy storage which is required. It would lead to cheaper and more reliable supply. A lot of these interconnections started, for example, the Gulf Cooperation Council, which has countries in the Gulf. They joined because of to stop the interruptions that they had because of trippings. So it would lessen the reserves. It would result in more reliable supply and cheaper supply. And of course, because of operating the thermal power stations in a better way, with a higher plant load factor, or more like a base load station, it would result in reduction of emissions. Yeah, next one. Now let's come to our part of the world, which is the one which we're talking about in Asia, the GCC region, which is the Gulf Cooperation Council, the SAARC region, and the BIMSTEC region, and of course the ASEAN region on further east. So let's see how we can try to interconnect these regions. Yeah, next. So just for people who are not aware of the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, there are 6 countries. KSA is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and of course Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, and Oman. The next. This is South Asia, of course, which has 8 countries, and everybody here would know Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, India, and Sri Lanka. Yes, next. And you have 10 countries in ASEAN, in the ASEAN region. These are shown here. So they are displaced geographically. So this is just to give you an overall context of the countries we are looking at. Next. Now this shows the longitudinal displacement. And as Reggie said, there's a difference. If you see the one starting from Saudi Arabia is somewhere at +2, the world time zones, and going till +8 when you come to the Philippines on the right-hand side. So you've got a difference of about 5 to 6 hours between the extremes in this region, which is about 1/4 of the longitude variation in the world. So you have a lot of diversity in demand which can happen, because you may have a difference of a number of hours, depending on which country you're in, going up to 5 hours. So it can, this interconnection will help in utilizing the generation more usefully. So it's just like optimal utilization of generation resources, like you have the Ola model or the Oyo Rooms model. The same way it helps to utilize the generation resources better and not waste free renewable energy if it cannot utilize it within that country or the region. Yeah, please go to the next one. So let's see how we can interconnect between, first of all, between the GCC region and the South Asian region or the SAARC nations. And you can see the two alternatives which are given as one is the overland, completely on land connection, which goes from Saudi Arabia to Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India, which could be AC or HVDC. And the other is a much shorter connection, but which goes across the sea from Oman to India, which Reggie was seeing, where a lot of interest has been expressed. And not only is it a shorter distance, it's more feasible because of geopolitical factors, which could come if a connection goes to so many countries. Now, this is what is planned is an HVDC connection, a submarine cable from Oman to Gujarat, and this distance is around 1,000 kilometers. And the greatest depth of the sea at this level is 3,500 meters, about 3.5 kilometers. And it's in other places it's less than that. So HVDC is we have to work out the economics. Broadly speaking, the HVDC substations as compared to AC would if you see the terminal stations, they would cost about 3 times that of AC stations, whereas a line, HVDC, if it's an overhead line, the HVDC line as well as the AC line would be the same cost. But if you see a submarine cable, that would cost maybe almost 5 to more than 5 times as compared to an overhead line. So the economics of this would have to be worked out depending on exact location of a placement of the cable. Let's go to the next one. Now, this is from South Asia to the other ASEAN region, and any connection which goes from South Asia to the ASEAN region would have to pass through Myanmar. Of course, Myanmar is also part of the BIMSTEC region, where India has taken interest in trying to do regional cooperation in the BIMSTEC region. So there are the two likely interconnectors, which would be India, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Thailand, or not going through Bangladesh, India, Myanmar, Thailand. And of course, there are more possible interconnections. So at this point of time, detailed studies would have to be undertaken on the feasibility of the connections and whether which would be more suitable, HVDC or AC. Let's go to the next one. The purpose of this, of course, is not to get into the details, because that's involved exercise. It's a technical thing about the type of interconnections, including which includes grid stability. Now, one is how these are the possibilities, but how do we go ahead? There are ways of connecting, but I think what is most important is stakeholder consultations, which is required many times on a continuous basis of engaging all the stakeholders, the government, the public sector undertakings, as Ministry of External Affairs, and everyone. And that is what may take things forward. So I think stakeholder consultation is very important for seeing that this cooperation does take place. Let's go to the next one. What could be suggested is establishment of a Pan-Asia grid interconnection project. There could be a project secretariat which would carry out the assessment as detailed earlier and carry out relevant studies. So a number of things would be required. Techno-economic studies would be required, and well, establishment of a connection would expectedly take about 5 years. The actual construction time could be less, but the whole thing would we could estimate it about 5 years. And of course, a project secretariat could be constituted to run the project with a strong team of technical people. And technical committee with 2 or 3 members from all the 3 regions should have to execute. Everyone has to be taken to confidence so as to build confidence among all the regions. And of course, you have a finance committee and regulatory and commercial committee to execute the relevant tasks of the project. Let's go ahead. So there are definite benefits of interconnection of regional grids in Asia, as we have seen in all over the world, of optimization. Options of interconnection, of course, would need to be decided based on technical feasibility and economics. And the interconnection would move ahead through workshops, seminars, informing all stakeholders of the benefits of interconnection and trade, and through platforms enabling government-to-government consultations. Because it's ultimately the governments who have to decide, but platforms are useful to get things moving. So I think that's all. Let's go to the next one. Shubha. Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Great. Thank you for such a beautiful presentation and opening remarks on the recap of the identified interconnections between the GCC, SAARC, and ASEAN grid. Unfortunately, Ghanshyam Prasad sir couldn't join us today due to some last-minute engagements in the ministry. So therefore, we would move on with the next presentation that is by Dr. Abhishek Shivakumar. So Dr. Abhishek Shivakumar is a senior researcher and consultant who specialized in energy systems modeling. With this brief background, I would like to invite Dr. Shivakumar to kindly come forward. And Brazier from the Indigo team, would you like to share the screen for the presentation? Or Dr. Shivakumar, can you hear me clear?
Yes, Shubham.
All right.
I can.
So I think Brazier is sharing the screen for your presentation.
Sure, yes, thanks.
Yeah.
Should I get started?
Just a second. Yeah, it's all yours, Brazier.
Yeah.
Abhishek.
Thanks very much, Shubham. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to be here with you to be discussing this very exciting topic, and it's exciting, I think, not just for engineers. I think it's exciting for anyone who's looking forward to a clean energy future, resilient power system, and so on. So today I would like to present some results from a initial modeling study that we've carried out. So I worked as part of this climate compatible growth project here in the UK as part of a team of modelers, and we've carried out an initial study to carry out a kind of techno-economic assessment of this Gulf India undersea interconnector. Can we just go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so to give you a bit of an overview. So this is a project or a study over 2 phases. The first phase is what I'll be talking about here today, which was in kind of a very broad exploratory assessment using a techno-economic model. But it was mainly to find out if the interconnector was considered favorable according to the techno-economic model, across a range of parameters. And in the second phase, which is ongoing at the moment. We are carrying out a more comprehensive techno-economic assessment with a broader set of uncertain parameters assessed, and a more involved financial modeling effort carried out as well. So what we've done is we've built an open source model of the GCC India electricity system and used this to explore a set of scenarios. And what we found, in conclusion, we found that the Gulf in India, the GCC India undersea interconnector was found to be techno-economically favorable in a majority of the scenarios that we studied. I should also mention that again, this work was carried out as part of a modeling team, all of whom are working in the climate compatible growth project. Next slide, please. So just a very quick overview of the kind of context. So as mentioned by others before this, the area we're focusing on in this study is the GCC India undersea interconnector, which we've assumed will have a landing point in Oman on the GCC side and will connect to the Western grid in India. And on the right, you can see the difference in solar PV generation. So the capacity factor by hour in a day across the 5 grids in India. So we've taken the averages for the 5 grids in India and the potential solar PV farm site on the GCC side, right at the bottom there. And what we can see is 2 things. One is the high solar potential on the GCC side. I mean, India across all the regional grids also has high potential, but I think there are certain sites specific sites on the GCC side that have a very high solar potential. And in addition to that, we can see that there's a small time difference that we can take advantage of. So, a couple of hours after we stop having solar PV generation on the India side, we still have generation potential from the GCC side. And this allows us to align the peak demand in India a bit better with the peak solar generation on the GCC side. Next slide, please. Thanks. So here is a summary of the techno-economic model setup. So it's a very simplified schematic of our model setup. So what we've done is we've built a model from 2015 to 2050 with 14 regions in total. So India is divided into 5 regions, Saudi Arabia into 4, and all the other GCC countries are modeled as individual countries. In addition, the model has a 24-hour time resolution across 4 seasons. And as I mentioned earlier, this model is built using an open source linear optimization tool called Osmosis. And one of the reasons we wanted to use an open source tool is because every number, all the input data, all the assumptions in a model like this are quite sensitive. And so by having an open source model and ideally using open data, we wanted to encourage transparency and have as much feedback and as much scrutiny of all the input data assumptions as possible. So we are really hoping to use this model as a way to collaborate with others who maybe have better knowledge on specific input data and assumptions. And just a kind of one-line summary on what the model does. So what it does is we have all of the power plants on both the GCC and on the India side represented. We have all the interconnectors and so on. And what the model then does is it optimizes the entire system over the entire model period. So from 2015 to 2050, and it tries to arrive at the least cost system over this time period. So, what should be invested in in which year, and how much should we generate from each power plant, and so on. So it gives us this mix of the power plants and the mix of the generation from those power plants that give us the least cost solution. And what we've done is we've plugged in this interconnector into that model and provided it as an option to the model, saying you can invest in this interconnector if it's techno-economically favorable. And the way we've set it up is that the maximum allowed capacity of the interconnector is 25 gigawatts by 2050. But the first year that it can start building it in is 2027, which is, of course, a very ambitious start, but we wanted to include as wide a range of possible start years as possible. Next slide, please. Can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. Sorry, the previous one. Yeah, thanks. So we use this model to study 20 different scenarios or 20 different model runs to assess the impact of different parameters. So we varied the interconnector capital cost. We looked at the impact of having a carbon tax. I mean, of course, this is more from a kind of thought experiment point of view, almost, just to see how would the model respond if we did put a price on carbon. So we assumed that either the carbon price would stay the same as it is right now, or it would increase to as high as $142 per ton by 2050. We looked at a range of solar PV costs, as well as different levels of fossil fuel prices. And we also considered a relatively conservative model setup for this initial study, because we wanted to make sure that before taking the next step, we weren't choosing very favorable conditions for the interconnector. We wanted to take a conservative model setup. So the solar PV installation was considered to be in Oman. So it doesn't have as wide a time difference between India and the GCC. And also we had no carbon emission reduction targets. So there's no cap on carbon emissions, but rather the model only has a carbon tax to take into account, which are varied across the scenarios. Next slide, please. Thanks. So looking at the results, so on the left there, the figure on the left shows that the interconnector was selected by the model in 15 of the 20 scenarios that we modeled. So the y-axis there are the 20 model runs, and the x-axis are the years from 2027 to 2050. And we can see that the model chose to build the interconnector in 15 of the 20 cases, and in 14 out of those 15 cases, it builds it to the maximum allowed capacity of 25 gigawatts. And on the right, what we can see is when the model chose to build the interconnector, so the first year that it chooses to build it by, and the impact that the interconnector cost and carbon tax has on this. And what we find is that it's the choice of when to build the interconnector is quite strongly impacted by the carbon price and interconnector cost. So at prices below $4,000 per kilowatt, it gets built in every case. And in carbon prices over $40 per ton, it also gets built in every case. And the higher the carbon tax and the lower the interconnector cost, the sooner the interconnector is built. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, we consider all the different power plants that are included in both the systems. And what we can see on the figure on the left there are the power capacity mixes across the 20 model runs. So we can see that they vary quite a bit in terms of total capacity across the model runs, from about 1,200 to 2,900 gigawatts of total capacity. I should mention that the demand that we've considered in all of these scenarios are the same, But the reason the capacity looks so different is because of the share of fossil fuels in the different model runs. So the higher there is, dispatchable power like coal and gas, the lower the total capacity is. But due to the lower capacity factor of wind and solar, we have quite high capacities in those scenarios. And what we can see is the contribution of hydro and nuclear stay quite constant across the model runs, but wind, the variable renewables like wind and solar, as well as the fossil fuels, vary quite significantly between the different model runs. And on the right there, we're looking at the generation mix for a specific model run in 2050. So in this case, it's model run number 2, where we're looking at the generation through the year, and we can see that the share of solar and wind is quite high. And what we also notice is that the share of hydropower during the monsoon months increases quite significantly. And this provides scope for bidirectional trade with the GCC. So while we get solar power generation from the GCC, India could potentially provide hydropower in the summer when the GCC has its peak electricity demand as well. Next slide, please.
Can we have the next slide, Brijesh?
Thank you. And then looking at the emissions across the different scenarios, and comparing the emissions. Sorry, the previous slide, please. Can we go to the previous slide, please? Yeah, thanks. This one, the emissions one. So here we're looking at the CO2 emissions in 2050 across the different scenarios. And we want to see if it's correlated with when the interconnector is built. And what we can see is that the emissions can vary quite significantly across the 20 model runs, from about 1,400 million tons to 4,900. And in 13 of the 20 cases with lowest emissions, the interconnector is built by 2040. Sorry, can we go to the next, the emissions slide, please? Can we move to the next slide?
Brijesh, can we go to the next slide?
I'm not sure if this is because I'm taking a little too much time for my presentation. I don't know if this is a sign.
Abhishek, is my screen visible to you?
I can see the presentation. I don't know if it's your screen, Shubham.
Yes. I just took control. So he's facing some kind of issues in terms of internet connectivity. So
Okay,
I'll just, sorry, apologies for the inconvenience.
No problem. That's all right. So now we're on the power capacity and generation slide, right? Can we just move to the next one, the emissions one, please?
Shall I move to the next slide?
Yes, the emissions one. So on my screen, I'm seeing the power capacity and generation slide.
Yep. 1 second. Huh?
Yeah,
Yep.
sure. Yeah, I don't see it moving on my side. I still see it on the power capacity and generation page.
No, we are on the emissions slide.
Shivam, I think you'll have to ask that other person to stop sharing, and then you have to share.
Okay, sir.
Then you have to share.
Okay, sir. Abhishek, are we on the emission slide now?
No, at least I see the interactive dashboard slide.
Okay. Must be some kind of a glitch because I am on the emission slide.
Has he stopped sharing, the other person?
Yes, sir. So
Yeah, I could give away the ending of the presentation, but usually it's fun to
sure,
build up to the climax. Could I maybe share my screen?
Sure. So I'll just stop sharing.
Yes, sure. I think maybe Brijesh will have to stop sharing as well. It seems like we're still seeing his screen, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, I see you're on the title slide.
Right, let's just skip ahead. Yes, thanks.
Sure.
Okay, so now, yeah, back to emissions. So we wanted to look at how emissions were affected by when the interconnector is built. And we found that there is a bit of a correlation there, that in 13 of the 20 cases with lowest emissions, the interconnector is built before 2045. So the sooner it's built, it coincides with lower total emissions by 2050. We've also built an interactive dashboard to look at these 20 different model results. So this will help with the stakeholder consultations, for instance, that were mentioned by the previous speaker, where we can play around with different project discount rates, as well as purchasing power agreement prices to see how that affects the financial viability of the project. So as of now, these are very simple financial metrics and simple breakdowns. In our ongoing work, we're doing a more comprehensive financial model, as well as updating Techno-Economic model. So in conclusion, what we found from our initial exploratory study is that there's a strong techno-economic case for the GCC India interconnector, because we found that it's part of the least cost solution, the optimal solution in 75% of the scenarios we studied. And we found some clear thresholds of capital cost and carbon price that affect the building of the interconnector, the choice to build the interconnector. And we also found that the total CO2 emissions seems to be correlated with when the interconnector is built and whether it's built at all. So when the interconnector is delayed or not built at all, those are the cases where we found that the CO2 emissions were the highest. Some of the next steps we're going to carry out in our ongoing work. So we're looking at bidirectional trade. As I mentioned, there's the potential for India to trade electricity to the GCC, particularly during the monsoon months with surplus hydropower. We're going to look at alternate sites for solar PV on the GCC side. So we're going to consider cases with a higher time difference to be more coincident with the peak demand in India. We're going to consider the trade to the east of India, so further east with Southeast Asia. And we're also going to look at alternate mechanisms of reducing carbon emissions. So we looked at a carbon tax here, but we're going to start looking at emission intensity targets or a carbon budget. And finally, we're going to look at the impact of battery storage technologies and the role that they could play. So thanks again for your attention and your patience. Again, it's a pleasure to be here with you all and talk about this very exciting topic. Thanks everyone.
Great. Thank you for such an insightful presentation, Dr. Shivakumar, on the Gulf India interconnection modeling studies. So with this, I would now like to move on to session 2, where we will be talking about the European experience of interconnection of regional grids. So with this, I would like to introduce Mr. Matthew Gray, who's the International Relations Officer for the European Commission Directorate General for Energy. We will be followed by a presentation by Mr. Thomas, Ms. Elaine, and Mr. Arnold on the policies and the regulatory framework, along with the electricity market coupling in the European Union. So with this, Matthew, sir, can you hear me clear?
I hear you clearly. Do you hear me?
Yes, sir, I hear you clear. So
okay, thank you very much, Shivam, and good afternoon to everyone in India. So we're really happy to be here with a number of colleagues from Europe, from the European Union, to explain the European experience with interconnections and also trade across these trade using these interconnections. I was certainly happy to hear earlier in the session, in the inauguration, Dr. Tripathi of the International Solar Alliance. We work as EU well together with the International Solar Alliance and want to step up in this cooperation in the near future. And also Joint Secretary Narayan, who has been also involved in EU-India smart grid workshops in the past. So that's really great to see them again. And Mr. Batra already referred to the experience with interconnections in the EU as the, let's say, worldwide, the most advanced experience in interconnecting the grids of many countries and also trading across those interconnections. More widely, our presence here in this session fits in an EU-India cooperation framework which is in place since 2016. In 2016, the leaders of the EU and of India adopted what is called the EU-India Clean Energy and Climate Partnership. And since then, we have stepped up cooperation mainly in energy efficiency on renewables as well, and on smart grids and on electricity market regulation. So these are in fact the four main subjects of cooperation in the frame of the EU-India Clean Energy and Climate Cooperation. And you probably know also that the EU has since December 2019 come out with its European Green Deal, in which we have even sharpened the objectives for integrating more renewables in our system, in which we have set the objective of mid-century climate neutrality. So the aspect of interconnections and how they can help in integrating more renewable energy and eventually arriving at climate neutrality by mid-century is a topic that was also very high on the agenda in the EU. And as I just heard from Abhishek's presentation, when looking also at interconnections in the Asian region, I hear from his study work that CO2 emissions would be at the highest if investments in certain interconnection projects would be delayed or would not take place at all. So that's one of the many reasons why interconnections can be very beneficial in our energy policies. Next to it is of course, the increased reliability and also the possibility to, in this way, bring more affordable electricity to our consumers. I was talking about this EU-India Clean Energy and Climate Partnership, which was adopted at a previous summit between leaders from the EU and India. There is now a new summit planned. It will take place on 8 May in Porto, Portugal, and let's hope that it can be a virtual, it can be a physical summit. And we, let's say, have already been approached by India to see if on the occasion of that summit or when preparing this summit, India and the EU could also more closely work together on what is broadly defined this issue of connectivity. And in the energy field, electricity interconnection and all the benefits it can bring is, in fact, the cornerstone of that work on connectivity. So we are preparing steps, let's say, to increase the cooperation with India on electricity connectivity, on interconnections. And that's why we are happy today with already to be here today with already a first session in which we can explain these experiences. So we have foreseen 3 presentations. I know for sure that my colleague Elaine is connected and that also Arnaud Weiss is connected. I'm not so sure about my colleague Thomas Brejean because I haven't heard of him today yet. The purpose was that Thomas would in the first presentation talk about the policies, the policy framework that we have in place for supporting interconnections, mainly how they can be developed, how they can be financed, and so on. Elaine will focus more on the cross-border trade rules, so the regulatory framework that governs the use of the interconnections. And then we have a third presentation by Mr. Arnold Weiss, who is the head of the Vienna office in Apex Spot, so a major power exchange in Europe, where he will explain how the market coupling in the EU or in Europe works more in practice. So with this, I give the floor back to Shubham, and I hope that my colleague Thomas is in the meeting, and so that Shubham can then give the floor to Thomas. Otherwise, then it will be Elaine who will start. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you
I'm
so
here.
much.
Thomas
Thank you
Brejean
so much.
speaking.
Great, Thomas, that you did.
Yep. So thank you, Matthew, for the wonderful opening remarks. So with this, I would like to introduce Mr. Thomas Brazier, who's the team leader, infrastructure and regional cooperation for electricity at the European Commission Directorate General for Energy. So, sir, with your permission, I have the presentation at my end, and would you want me to share the screen and present?
Okay, thank you. Actually, I can present it from my side
Sure,
because I fine-tuned a bit the slides
okay.
during the
Sure.
beginning of the meeting. So I will share.
Sure. Okay.
here you are. Is it fine? Can you see it?
Yes, sir, I can see it. Maybe if you can just kindly go to the presentation mode.
Yeah, I
Sure.
will do it definitely. Thank you first for giving us the possibility to present you the experience on the EU side with regard to electricity interconnection, and indeed, as Mathieu explained, the policy frame for developing it. Can you see? Just I will not put my slides in full screen because sometimes it's creating some technical hiccups. So if can you see them properly this way?
No, sir, we can just see your desktop background. So maybe it has been minimized.
Ah, sorry. Okay.
No problem, sir.
So sorry, I'm not so used with wait, excuse me. Is it the one that I share? I cannot. So you see it here?
Yes, sir, we
Do
can
you see the slides?
Yes, sir.
Sorry. Okay, so it was multiple screens make multiple problems. I will present you briefly the policy framework around electricity interconnections in the EU, which is happening in the frame of the TENI regulation, TENI for Trans-European Network for Energy regulation. I will move to the next slide. So those trans-European energy infrastructure, TENI regulation, why do we need, why do we have such an infrastructure, such a policy frame? This regulation comes from a dynamic which started already 20 years ago, aiming for establishing a energy union in the sense that all the electricity energy markets as a whole, and I will focus on electricity, but all the energy markets in the EU from the member states should be better interrelated up to being fully integrated. And this required at the time and since today to set up a frame to allow member states to develop jointly infrastructures which will facilitate the exchange of energy from one country to another, with several policy goals, joint policy goals, namely improving security of supply across the EU and also between the EU and its neighbors, improving market integration, instead of having then 28 markets and now 27, acting independently from each other. You can, by linking those markets, find some very significant gains, for instance, with regard to the price of electricity. This has a direct link then to improving the competition across the EU, the whole EU competition on the electricity side, and last but not least, improving the sustainability of energy use, exchange, and to some extent, and also production with regard to renewables. So this policy objective led, as regard infrastructure, to the adoption in 2013 of the 10E regulation, so Trans-European Network for Energy regulation, which aims to accelerate and facilitate the development in good time of key energy infrastructures, and namely, or more precisely, of core projects having European interest, even though being established in member states in some cases, but most of the cases also linking member states to one member states to the other, so having a cross-border dimension. So those projects of common interest are then supported via this policy framework. And this includes all the energy carriers, electricity, storage, gas, up to now oil was also, or originally oil was also included, but has faded over time, of course, and smart grids. The TENI regulation propose or aims to establish a working method between the member states. And by member states, we mean the authorities, so the ministries, but also the regulators, also the TSOs and project promoters. And so to organize the work between all those stakeholders by defining some priority corridors where we have identified common needs, common interests, but also challenges that have to be addressed specifically. And within those corridors, you have all the stakeholders which work together in defining then and choosing what are the projects which have this European dimension and deserves to be supported, steered, incentivized to some extent from the EU perspective. This TENI is a comprehensive toolbox of measures. Those measures aim at accelerating and facilitating the permit granting process, which is, as you know, always long and can be subject to many blockages or some lengthy procedures which can put at threat some important projects. So here it aims to ensure that the permit is granted within a certain time frame. It helps also enhancing the early public engagement in order to ensure public acceptance and ensure that all the stakeholders that are concerned are part of the process in order to ensure that there is a common commitment. The regulatory framework and treatment of PCIs is also improved in the sense that you had and you still have today, but to a lesser extent, you have some heterogeneity in the national frameworks for building infrastructures. And here, this TENI regulation intends to harmonize, even though the competence remains in the member states. It helps to have a more level playing field, let's say, between the different countries. And last but not least, it aims to provide financial support to the PCIs, so projects which are recognized as having a European dimension and European interest via the Connecting Europe Facility tool. What is this, the Connecting Europe Facility? This is a financial instrument which helps, which aims to support those projects and help them passing through the investment challenge, which can be a blocking factor for many of those projects, which are by nature heavy and having quite a lot of uncertainties. You can have grants provided for either development studies from quite early stage up to advanced stage. And you have, of course, then money can be provided for grants for work with quite significant amounts, possibly. For instance, we have two recent examples: an interconnection between France and Spain. The Biscay Gulf interconnector was granted 520 billions 3 years ago. And we had 2 years ago an interconnector between Ireland and France So it's not on purpose. It was just the projects are anyway evaluated on their own merits, which was also granted 500. And last year there were 800 billions granted to projects in the Baltics to synchronize the whole region. So this is a core tool, but here important to say that the projects, the priority remains that the projects are funded on private funds, private money, and the CEF comes as a last recourse in case gaps have been identified and cannot be filled by private investors. Then the CEF will come as final support based on a clear distribution of cost and benefits between the different the member states involved. This frame has been established in 2013, has proved to be efficient since we have to date 42 PCIs which have been commissioned, so which are now in operation since 2013, and we have 75 PCIs which are at a very advanced stage of building or development, and the results are then proven of these tools. But anyway, after some years, it's common practice and good practice at European level to revise anyway a legal framework to ensure that it fits with the more recent and renewed policy objectives. And in the case today for the TENI, of course, the Green Deal mentioned by Mathieu earlier on is now the new priority for the EU, reaching climate neutral Europe by 2050 is the new motto or the new motivation. And so the TENI has to inscribe itself in this new framework. So European Green Deal, climate neutral objective, as I just said, and it has also to take into account the return on experience and the feedback from stakeholders, and all this led to proposing a new TENI framework proposal for a project of TENI framework last December, which is now being reviewed by the co-legislators. Just to come back on what those PCIs are meaning in practice, just few maps here, not totally up to date, but I think illustrative anyhow, of those projects that have been or are being supported at European level. You can see here, this is on the North Sea with then a situation we are tackling now with one member state who's no longer member states, the UK. But you can see that you have a lot of interconnections projects here, which aim to, of course, link the different member states, but in particular to allow and support steer the development of offshore renewable energy in the North Sea, which is the most among the most promising offshore generation area within the EU. And so you can see that all those projects, those lines are for some of them already operational, and others are projects which are from early stage of development to in building phase. You have, so here you can see the priority in the Northern Europe is to create a grid within the North Sea for offshore. In the southern part of Europe, southwest part of Europe, France, Spain, and then also Germany, you can see that there are other problematics at stake. For Spain and Portugal, the problem is to try to circumvent their physical isolation by increasing the connection with let's say the core part of Europe, and then the link being France. And that's why you have here, you have 3 projects which are in development phase. For this one, this is the one I mentioned earlier, project that received 500 billion euros. So it's a connection through the Bay of Biscay, which is, so it's a subsea cable, and you have then other projects through the Pyrenean, crossing the Pyrenean mountains. And here another illustrative aspect: Germany the issue in Germany is ensuring that the production of electricity, which is based in the northern part of the country, is properly led to the place where it is used, so the industrial regions in the southern parts of Germany. So there is a need for a backbone, and this is this project, and this one they aim to really ensure a solid and high size interconnection between the north and the south. And these are key projects, highly supported, difficult to put in place, and still in the phase of development. And here, the northern parts for the Baltics, here it's more about synchronizing the different countries and linking more their markets. And in the southeast part of Europe, this is the aim is to really improve the interconnection between the many member states, smaller member states for some of them in the region, and also to circumvent or minimize the isolation of some of those countries. Cyprus, you can see easily that they are very far from the other member states, and they need to be linked to the others. So overview of what has been achieved with the TENI. As I just said before, the 4 core objectives of the Energy Union have been met. We have now a secured and more diversified gas supply, so not really the purpose of today, but important. It also applies for the electricity. Interconnection targets of electricity has been achieved for now 19 member states over 27, which is a progress towards the starting line. And the market is more competitive. Elaine will elaborate on this later on, with a more increased convergence of the energy prices and electricity prices. And of course, there is a much higher share of renewable electricity. So thanks, of course, to the development of the generation side, but also by having developed a grid which is able to absorb and ensure that the production is led to the place where will be consumed. This is the evaluation that has just been done of the TENI in preparation of the proposal that is on the table today. So I will not repeat myself here. The process under the TENI has also proven to be efficient. Regional cooperation in those regional groups that I described earlier has demonstrated that it allows to really develop a culture of cooperation between the different stakeholders within the member states, but also between the member states. The permitting procedures have been improved in terms of simplicity, but also length and duration. Even though you have some problems, but they tend now to become more at the margin. And the 10-year network development plan process, which is at the core of this grid planning at regional level, which gives a perspective of at least 10 years and to all the actors, has also proven to be an efficient tool, subject to improvement, of course, but the basis, let's say, is robust. Now, the new challenges or the new objectives for the TENI regulation and the development of electricity interconnections at the EU level meet the Green Deal objectives, as I just said, meaning developing a grid that is appropriate and fit for developing of renewables at large, but in particular, that fits with the needs for offshore renewables, which is one of the areas for very promising in terms of capacity development. The strategy, the Commission issued a strategy a few months ago, aiming to reach 300 gigawatts of wind offshore by 2050, starting from a 12 gigawatt today, so quite a big jump. And this requires, of course, to have wind farms installed, offshore wind farms and offshore energy assets installed wherever relevant. But they have to be properly connected to the shore and again to the places where the energy will be used. So TENI is proposing the new projects under discussion, propose tools to operationalize this ambition. The other objective for the renewed TENI regulation is to strengthen the working area which already exists before, which is smart grids, smart electricity grids, sorry, which is really the future by allowing to link the transmission to the distribution side, so really big scale with the almost individual electricity production, and ensure that this whole electricity generation is appropriately and efficiently integrated into the system. So here a lot to do, and then in terms of process, a lot to rethink, in particular the relationship between the distribution system operators and the transmission system operators. DSOs were not before included in the TENI context, the TENI frame, and now they are, the objective is to have them as a full actor. And last important objective is to ensure that the TENI is moving to the next step in terms of energy carriers. I mean here inclusion of having a system integration approach with hydrogen playing a big role. And here that's an aspect, that's a dimension where the electricity and the gas formerly used for gas infrastructures are coming into a more common frame, while before they were addressed exclusively or separately. This slide is maybe too nitty-gritties for the purpose of this meeting today, but it will mean rethinking the approach or fine-tuning the approach of the electricity corridors that we have so far to align them with the new objectives. And here the innovation being that offshore, which is, as I said earlier, a very important development objective for the coming years. Offshore being addressed specifically by allowing some planning at sea basins level. That is a core aspect. And I will stop here. I hope I was not too long. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much for such a detailed and insightful presentation, Mr. Thomas. Now I would like to invite Ms. Ellen O'Connell and Mr. Arnold Weiss to come and present. Ellen, ma'am, can you hear me clear?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Okay, well. So ma'am, I have a presentation at my end. So do you want me to share it or?
Yeah, please.
Okay, all right. Okay.
So I think I'd like to start by, well, first of all, thank you for inviting us here. I think it's very interesting to share these exchanges and to really understand what's happening. And I can see already that Mr. Batra had a very good understanding of the EU electricity system. So I hope I'm not going to be repeating too much. So I think my colleague Thomas already explained very well the huge importance in the EU of developing the grid infrastructure, and also the amount of effort and funding and time that all of the member states put into this. And so once this grid is built, and once we have all of these interconnections built, how are they used, and how are they used within the internal electricity market? So I'll focus a bit on that. So not really on the hardware building the grid, but the software, how do you use it? So if you move to the next slide. I think within this as well, it's very important to bear in mind the context that we're dealing with. So there are, so how we trade electricity across borders in the EU is very much based around the electricity market design that we have here. I won't go into the details of market coupling because that will be the next speaker, but it's very much around how do we create a market that works efficiently right across the EU, and that's really as integrated as possible. And so there's a few things that are driving our policies in this. So one is it's the trilemma, really, the energy trilemma. So you've got decarbonisation, affordability, and security of supply. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how cross-border trade helps for those elements. So in terms of our climate goals, we've already talked about the European Green Deal. It's how the EU is going to implement our commitments under the Paris Agreement. And we have a net zero target for 2050. Now, what that means when you look at the detail is that we're going to need over 65% of renewable electricity. And that's a huge change for our electricity system. And there are many things that we need to change and we need to work on in order to enable this. So we had a previous session this morning where I gave an overview of the clean energy package. And I think that's also very important. So how the markets are organized at national level, so in the different EU member states, and then of course how they are integrated then across the EU level. So we've made significant changes in order to make the market fit for renewables and renewables fit for the market to enable a full participation. But then what's really important is how we trade electricity across borders, because you can integrate more renewables over a broader area if you've got a well-designed and well-interconnected system. I really like this chart on the right, just showing how our climate ambition has increased over the last number of years. So you see back in 2008, we at that time agreed on what we thought was an incredibly ambitious target of 2020 by 2020. It was very catchy. And that has increased significantly. And now you see with our Green Deal targets, we're planning to have significantly more renewable electricity and energy efficiency and greenhouse gas emissions reductions by 2030. So if I go on to the next slide, and we see that cross-border interconnection will play a role there. It's also important in the context of security of supply. So in the old electricity world, you could have a power plant that could generate at a very flat level, at whatever level was needed and whatever was required. We're moving to a new electricity world where we're seeing a lot more renewables, variable renewables. I really like this slide of Germany, of how with certain projections, the solar infeed into Germany and the renewables infeed into Germany by 2030. And you see that it's really not that easy anymore. You can't just generate at a certain level. When you have high levels of renewable penetration, the transmission system operators need to be able to respond. We need to have backup capacity. We need to be able to balance the grid. And there are many ways to do that. So Tom already mentioned some of the more distributed level resources. And so we're really looking right across the sector. So different types of technology, but also more local management of some of these issues. But where interconnection really comes into the game is that you see here, we need to be more flexible. We need to move flexibly and react quickly. Now, an old coal-fired power station, it can take days to warm up from cold. But we need to be able to react much more flexibly. So interconnection can really help with that. And the flows on the interconnectors can really change now every 15 minutes. And if you have the right tools and the right rules in place, you can really rely on your neighbors for security of supply. And if the market is designed in this way, then the market also can support security of supply. So on the next slide, the other area that is going to be, the next slide, the other area that's going to be very important is, of course, in terms of affordability. So before we adopted the Clean Energy Package in 2018, we conducted a very thorough impact assessment. It's almost 1,000 pages. So if you ever have trouble sleeping some night, I recommend it. But there were some very interesting findings in there. And what it showed was that if each member state really viewed their own energy and electricity system as an island and looked at how much backup capacity you need there, it ended up being significantly more expensive. Having strong cross-border trade and interconnection rules can mean that there's more of a level playing field because you have access to more markets, but also there are huge capacity savings. And at the end of the day, they're the savings that consumers will get, because at the end of the day, the cost of the electricity system goes onto the consumer's bill. So really having strong interconnection and good rules can keep the overall cost of the energy transition down. And then on the next slide, I'm going to talk now about what are the rules in the clean energy package. So what was our starting point? So we've been building a very impressive and very well integrated electricity grid in Europe over the last number of decades. However, it wasn't being used, certainly not to the full capacity. And so you see on some borders, the level of usage was higher than on others. Some, of course, they were almost at 100%, but on average, the amount of capacity of the cable that was being used for trade was around 50% on average. And so that was what we were looking at when we were thinking about the clean energy package and what changes might need to be made. So on the next slide, I'll talk now about the changes that are new in the electricity regulation. So that regulation is 943/2019. So what's in the electricity regulation? Well, it's always been in EU legislation that you should, if you have one price zone for your member state, I'm not sure how familiar the panelists all are with, and the audience all is with how the EU system is designed. So we have an area of price zones, or bidding zones they're called. And then within each price zone, there's one electricity price. And then market coupling means that the electricity will flow from the lower price to the higher priced area. And the next speaker will go into more details about that. But within that price zone, electricity should be able to flow freely. So that means that in the north of the price zone, if there's a power plant, the electricity should be able to get to a city in the south of the price zone, for example. Now, because, well, mostly for historical reasons, at EU level, those price zones broadly correspond to member states, but not always. Italy has 7 price zones, for example, and Denmark has several, and so does Sweden. Sweden has 4. And so it's not always the case that it's one member state per price zone. So the rules at EU level about this are based on the price zone or the bidding zone. They mean the same thing. And so addressing structural congestion within that bidding zone is absolutely crucial, so that the electricity can flow freely within that area, so that you have one price for that market. And what's new in the regulation is that you can choose how to address that. So in the past, the rules said that if there was structural congestion within your bidding zone, that you have to split the bidding zone according to the structural congestion. Now there's also rules that you can build more grid infrastructure in order to strengthen that zone. So we heard earlier about the important projects in Germany, for example, that will strengthen their price zone and make it and improve the integrity of the price zone. Of course, you can also reconfigure your bidding zone, and Italy did one of those quite recently. And at the moment at EU level, we're also looking at a bidding zone review with a view to potential bidding zone reconfiguration if that's the result of the review. And then we have a strengthened governance process now in the regulation. And in the past, it would not be possible to take a decision on a bidding zone review if everybody didn't agree. But now the Commission has been given almost like a referee role, that if there's no agreement about the outcome of a bidding zone review, then the Commission can decide on that. But of course, it's for the member states first to decide, and only if they cannot find an agreement, then that decision would be escalated to the EU level. So the benefits of this system is that the market then becomes better aligned to the physical grid, because it means that the TSOs can really free up cross-border trade, because they're not trying to solve so many internal issues. And that means that you can use your cross-border interconnections much more, and you can have much more available for trade, and you can manage the imports and exports much better. And it also reduces the need for TSO interventions after the market closes, because if you assume that a price zone has no congestion, but actually after the market closes, you see, actually there are quite a lot of congestions, and the TSO needs to turn down a power station here and turn one up somewhere else, then that all adds money and costs money to consumers. So we are really reinforcing the importance of having no structural congestion within bidding zones in the regulation. And then on the next slide, The next slide then has the rules about, okay, so you've addressed now the price zones and you've addressed the structural congestion in the price zones. How do we trade electricity then between those zones? And so we've always had the principle at EU level that you should maximize trade across borders. That actually comes from the Treaty of the Functioning of the EU. Electricity is considered a good, and within the EU, we have a principle of free movement of goods. So electricity, you shouldn't block imports or exports at the borders of electricity. And there should be no discrimination either between cross-zonal, so between bidding zones, or internal trades. So you shouldn't prioritize a trade within your bidding zone and then close the border and able to manage that. They should all be treated the same, and it's the efficient trades are the ones that should be dispatched. So what's also new, and maybe you have heard of this, is there's a 70% target now. You might recall the slide that I presented a few minutes ago, where it showed that there was an average of 50% capacity of these interconnectors were used. Now we have a minimum 70% target for each interconnector that should be made available for trade. Now, of course, the TSOs need to, sometimes it's impossible to offer 100%. Sometimes that can be very difficult because we have day-ahead markets here in Europe, and the capacity needs to be made available to those markets. And then there can be uncertainty from the time of the forecast to the market closure. And so there needs to be some margin there to manage uncertainty. We call that a reliability margin. And there are also, because of our system in Europe, there are also loop flows on the system. So the TSOs have a margin there to make sure that the system stays secure, but they should make available 70% of the capacity for trade and should make it available to the market. And then this will, the reason behind this is what we already talked about earlier: increased security of supply and the reduced need for new investments. So that would reduce the overall system cost. And then I have one last slide. So the next slide, just to really explain how integrated actually our markets are in Europe. And a few references were made earlier in the day to the situation that happened in Texas as well. And of course, security of supply is something that's absolutely crucial here to us as well in Europe. And within the clean energy package, we will now conduct an annual European resource adequacy assessment. So really looking at what capacity do we have in Europe? What do we potentially need? Where might there be gaps? And also taking into account the interconnectors in that. So maybe you have a capacity gap, but maybe it's cheaper for you to build a new interconnector rather than build a new power plant, or maybe your neighbor has a power plant, and actually between you both, how your systems work and how they're integrated, you don't need to build anything. And so we have rules as well that will allow power plants in one country to join a capacity mechanism in another country. So if there's a scheme they're supporting capacity in another country, that needs to be open across border as well. So we really try to take a European approach to security of supply, and that's very much underpinned by the level of interconnection, by the network of interconnections that we have around Europe. And I think that's a really important message maybe to take away from my presentation, that even if you have a really strong network of interconnections, and even if you've really built out the grid, you need very much a strong set of rules for how you manage those trades and what are the rules about making this available to the market. And that would all be with a view to making sure that consumers get the full benefits of those interconnections that were maybe modeled already in the planning stage. So thank you very much for listening to me. That was the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you for the presentation, Ms. Ellen. Now, do we have any questions? If we have any questions, we can take them on the chat, or maybe we can move on with the next presentation by Mr. Arnold. So I think one of the panelists just raised a hand. Pankaj, yeah, Pankaj, you can unmute and you can directly ask a question to Ms. Ellen.
Yeah, just one question. It's what is the percentage of day-ahead trade in as compared to the total trade? You know, the day-ahead versus the total trade. What's the percentage in Europe, an average?
In Europe, you can of course trade long term, but at the day ahead stage for the market, if you either have to nominate that flow, or you make it free, make it available for trade. So at the end, and I think maybe Arnold will have more information about the differences and about how that works between the long-term markets and the day ahead. But we have a use it or lose it or use it or sell it principle. So all of the capacity that isn't going to be fully used from the long-term trade is all put together into the same pot and used at the day ahead stage to make sure that the market has access to all of the capacity.
Okay, yeah, but on a yearly basis, any percentage figure?
I would have to check that number for you. Maybe the next speaker might have more details to hand.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Yeah, maybe I can start with trying to answer this. We normally have, I mean, it really differs from member state to member state in the European Union, but I think we have a churn rate of 3 to 4 that you trade power 3 times to 4 times before you consume it. So the traded volume is roughly 3 times, 4 times as big as the consumed one, and the intraday markets and day-ahead markets, for instance, for Germany, amount to roughly 50% of the yearly consumption. So one could state that the overall volume traded is roughly 5-6 times as high as the short-term markets on power exchanges. But we need to add the forward markets. We need to add all kind of OTC trades. So there are various ways of trading power in Europe. And we can also say that the percentage of short-term trading is increasing throughout the last years quite rapidly.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. So now I would like to hand over to Mr. Arnold Weiss, Head of Vienna Office, Epexport, for throwing some light on the electricity market coupling in the European Union. So, sir, over to you. Can you hear me clear?
Yes, I can hear you clear. Did you receive my presentation, or do I need to share it?
No, I have not. So will it be possible for you to share?
Yes, sure. No issue at all.
Okay, all right.
Just give me a second.
So you can share your screen once you're ready. Sure.
Yes, I'm. You have to give me a second. My system is currently not reacting.
Yes, I can see your presentation.
Can you see it already? Oh, that's great.
Yes,
Perfectly.
Yes. Okay.
Perfect. Yes, so thank you very much for the kind introduction and having me here. It's a pleasure to join today's web conference on behalf of Epexport and to contribute. It will be my job to add our perspective as a market operator to the implementation of the EU market coupling solution. And I would like to start with some introductory remarks. When we refer to implicit market to market coupling, we first refer to an implicit form of allocating capacity, which means that both capacity and electricity are traded at the same point in time. For a market participant, only the electricity transaction is visible in this form of market coupling. They do not trade the capacity, they only trade the power. So they only place their bid, their sale or purchase bid for power. And the way the power is delivered in the end does not matter too much to the market participant. For them, it's important that they are able to buy the power or to sell it. And so the use of the capacity is only contracted implicitly. The second introductory remark is about that there are different kinds of market coupling, and this might be interesting to note. And when we talk about market coupling in Europe, we talk about the so-called price coupling. Like in any solution, the power exchanges, the marketplaces, send the orders of the members to a common market coupling system. And this system then runs an optimization and tries to identify the successful bids. In the end, the system is identifying the accepted orders and the net positions between the bidding zones. And in the price coupling solution, this central algorithm also finds and fixes the prices of every participating market. So this is special about the price coupling solution, that the prices of the individual participating bidding zones are also determined altogether by a single solution. How does market coupling work? We have already heard a lot about that. In Europe, we have the zonal approach. So we have the different markets, the different bidding zones, where any demand can meet any supply. And when we couple different of those markets, we try, and we cover them implicitly, we try to optimize the allocation of this available cross-border capacity. So the market coupling operators render a service, let's say, to the system operators, and we try to guarantee that the capacity is allocated as efficiently as possible, since it's then attributed to those entities, to those market participants that value power the most. So this is the hope that we gain efficiency from that. From a market perspective, this form of market coupling leads to that we add additional demand to the exporting market, and we add additional supply to the importing market with the higher prices. This is actually reflected by the shifts of the demand and the supply curves to the right. And what these two graphs also illustrate quite nicely is that market coupling in the very end has a flattening effect, so that the prices of those two markets being coupled get closer to one another. They don't have to be identical. If sufficient allocation is available, the prices would be equal. As long as the capacity is not sufficient, we still have different prices and a congestion rent to be distributed. How did market coupling actually emerge and develop in the EU? As already outlined, in most cases, the starting point of the market of a power market was the member state, the national borders of the state, and in the 1990s, something started. Different member states wanted to get coupled, wanted to couple their borders. And here, the credit belongs to one of our competitors, Nord Pool Spot, that did that for the Nordic region in the 1990s first. EPEC Spot then joined in 2006 when we coupled the so-called Central Western European region, CWE. And after those coupled regions were established and ran in a stable manner, we started coupling those regions. So the first regions that were coupled in 2010 were, not really surprisingly, CWE and the Nordic region. And then further and further regions were added, like the Baltic region, the Southwestern European region, and so on. And by the end of 2014, we arrived at what we called multi-regional coupling. So having several regions coupled under a single regime. This was limited to the so-called day-ahead market, so where you're placing your orders and where you trade for the delivery of the next day. It's important to note that in the very beginning, this was a voluntary cooperation based on private contracts between the market operators and the system operators. Of course, it was backed by political and regulatory considerations, but in the beginning, the governance was privately organized. Today, this is quite different, as we have already learned, and you might wonder what has caused this shift from a privately organized setting to a more regulated one. And this is rather my personal explanation for this situation. I see actually two main drivers. The first one is that simply the political relevance of the physical short-term markets increased rapidly and massively. Of course, this was pushed by the expansion of the intermittent renewables, solar and wind. We have already heard about that. So nowadays, more than 1 billion of terawatt hours are traded on the European intraday and day-ahead markets every year. So we are handling in a lot of money, a lot of welfare that needs to be distributed and hopefully gained. And because the short-term markets are so closely connected to the physics, to the physical grid, a serious malfunction of those markets could easily endanger security supply and have negative economic effects. So I think this was the reason why regulating market coupling was quite high or became quite important for the regulators and authorities in general. The second point is that the whole process got more and more complex. So with more members, more member states, and more project participants joining market coupling, with developing an intraday market and a coupled intraday market besides the day-ahead market, by taking into account cross-references to the European short-term allocation of capacity rights and what's happening real time, so the balancing market, the private solution became less attractive, since it became more and more burdensome to include all the different preferences from market participants and project parties on an equal footing. So I think in the end, all in both parties agreed that there was a need for a harmonized set of binding rules to guarantee a reliable and robust system. It was actually the so-called Commission regulation establishing a guideline on capacity allocation and congestion management, CACM, that regulated this part of our business. That was the first time, by the way, that the activity of power exchanges, of organized marketplaces, were regulated, were recognized by the lawmaker. And they created a new term for this activities of a power exchange. When they address a power exchange within the remit of market coupling, they refer to the nominated electricity market operator, or short NEMO, which is not my most favored acronym for obvious reasons, but it's well established nowadays, and it really describes what a market operator has to do to organize the coupled short-term markets. So the business of a power exchange might be broader than the business of a NEMO. A NEMO, before a NEMO is entitled to offer its services, it has to run through a designation process to establish whether it is eligible to offer those services. And interestingly, those processes are organized at the national level. So actually a marketplace, a NEMO, has to get nominated in every marketplace it wants to offer its services. Thankfully, there was also a passporting regime established. So when you have received your designation in one member state, you can simply take this designation and reuse it in any other member state you want to offer your services as a market operator. This has certain limits, since we agreed to have a quite diverse regime. So we have actually markets where those NEMOs can compete with other. We have so competitive markets, and we have monopolies where only a single NEMO is allowed to offer its services. And those monopoly NEMOs and competitive NEMOs are cooperating with one another. They also have to cooperate to establish this market coupling solution. They also have to cooperate to operate the central system that I have already mentioned. Besides that, even competing NEMOs have to cooperate with one another within the limits of the competition law, of course. And this cooperation is taking place in a new body, the so-called NEMO committee. So all European NEMOs are working together in this NEMO committee and develop several deliverables that we will take a look at later. The very core, in my humble opinion, of our activities here is the so-called market coupling operator function. This is actually the operation of this central algorithm that is collecting all the bits, that is taking into account the capacity data from system operators, and then establishes what are the successful bits, how does power flow, what are the net flows, etc., etc. So this tries to give you an overview of what's inside this guideline, establishing this guideline on capacity allocation and congestion management. It might be a little bit difficult to read, so let me guide you through that. On the upper part, you see the so-called responsibilities, and you see here that TSOs and NEMOs are working closely together to organize market coupling within the European solution. The TSOs are calculating the cross-border capacity and then are submitting this to the central system. The NEMOs are collecting the orders from the members and add them to the central system. And here we have the central system that is calculating the net positions and the prices, and this then has to be validated and further processed in the post-coupling processes. The guideline, the Commission regulation, does not provide you with the full technical and operational details. So what the NEMOs and the TSOs have to do is they had to propose how those sets, how those methodologies would look like, and that's in the lower part where we see that, for instance, NEMOs together in the NEMO committee had to develop what are the products that are coupled, are the minimum, are the maximum prices, what happens if this coupling solution fails, and so on. So this is established and proposed in so-called methodologies, which are then proposed to the authorities that have then the possibility to request amendments or to amend them by themselves. And in the end, they become an additional binding framework at a very, very technical level to govern market coupling. I'm running out of time. So how do the market coupling solutions look like? In the day, as already said, we have the day-ahead market and the intraday market. Those are the parts of the European market coupling solution. And the day-ahead market is a blind auction that takes place every day a week, every day a year. And it's a single auction for all the markets of the EU, taking place at 12 o'clock noon the day before delivery. And you can trade hourly contracts, so you can trade all the 24 hours of the next day in this auction, and you can combine these hours in blocks, in simple blocks, smart blocks, big blocks, which might go a little bit too much into the details. As we see the map here, the countries with the light color, the so-called 4MMC countries, 4 market coupling countries, they are a region that still has to be coupled to the single day-ahead auction. This is a step that will be taken this year, hopefully in June. And then we have the intraday market, the single intraday coupling solution. This is not an auction, this is a continuous trading solution. And here contracts can be traded in most cases starting with 3 p.m. the day before until 60 minutes before delivery the same day. So that's the most short-term market that we offer. Again, we have hourly products and blocks, but in an increasing number of member states, we also have sub-hourly contracts. So 15-minute products can be traded, 30-minute contracts can be traded, and that shall become the new standard. A quick look at the map. The orange countries are those countries that joined the single intraday market coupling solution in the first step, in the first wave. That's the orange one in 2018, June 2018. The purple countries, or the countries with the purple color, joined this market coupling solution in the second wave in November 2019, and the dark gray colored countries still have to join the solution. As far as I know, Italy and Greece will join by the end of this year. And I would like to stop with a very, very quick outlook, since I told you a lot about the history of market coupling, but this story is far away from being concluded. So there's a lot ahead of us. And I see this is not an exhaustive list, but very high on the agenda, especially of the European Commission, is that we complete the internal market for power in Europe, that we have the single coupling solutions all over Europe, so that that we have a single auction for the day-ahead market coupling solution, and then shift to more refined ways of calculating capacity. We still have to take care of the missing go-lives in the intraday coupling solution, and the bidding zone reviews will play a role, since they will define what is a market in the very end. What is the bidding zone exactly looking like? We have further products to be developed. We will shift to 15-minute products in the day-ahead market. We will introduce a cross-product matching facility in the intraday market, so that you can match 15-minute contracts in one country with an hourly contract in another country. And we are due to deliver intraday auctions that will complement the continuous market, with the big advantage that an intraday auction then prices the value of the intraday capacity. There are a lot of discussions on the governance going on, with the Green Deal and the clean energy package in place. The CACM CACM 2.0 is already in the starting blocks. And with this outlook, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you very much.
Great. Great. Thank you for such a wonderful presentation, Mr. Weiss, on the electricity market coupling in the EU. In the interest of time, we will quickly move to the next session, which is the action plan for feasibility study of identified interconnections and market design for interconnected power markets. So with this, I would like to invite the moderator for this session, Mr. Pankaj Batra, to kindly take the floor. And sir, the floor is all yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Shivam. So I think we've got we have an hour, Shivam? Do we have
yes,
an
sir.
hour?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We are being delayed by an hour, so we have an hour.
Okay. So would you? I've got the list, the name of speakers, 13 speakers. Are all of them there, or
yes, sir. All the speakers that I have just sent, they're there.
Okay, you've just sent it to me. Okay. So I think we'll start immediately without spending too much time. This is action plan for feasibility study of identified connections and market design for interconnected power markets. So there are two of them. One is the interconnection feasibility study of interconnections, and the other is market design for interconnected markets. So we've got a big panel. I will not spend much time, and we've got people from various countries. So I'd request Mr. Baba, who is the chairman and managing director of the Independent System Operator of India, I'd request each person to talk between 4 and 5 minutes, and so that we can leave some time for discussion or for question and answer if there are any. So, Mr. Baba, I believe that you are there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good afternoon and good morning to all. And
Please
it was an excellent session listening to such a learned people. And I think we have to learn a lot from Europe, without doubt. And Indian systems, the federal system, and is very close to Europe. And we have a country where there are many countries, and we have many states, and they have being concurrent. So I think the science that they have told about the interconnections and all, there is a lot to adopt and adapt in India. And there is no doubt, we have been telling for quite some time that interconnection always contributes to the overall development. You all know that we have come up from the systems where integrated, individual states to now integrated country, and we have now even connected to neighboring country also, and we are all deriving benefit of it. So there is no doubt that interconnection will always pave way for optimization and overall benefit of the country. So and there are many things which we have to, of course, the most and first and foremost is what we need to understand each state. I always now this thing is that how to adopt them. So we need to have internal systems and processes very strong, like accounting and scheduling, accounting, and a system should be there. So the state regulations have to be immediately and without any further delay have to be synced, and we need to take up the internal and the capacity building of all the states have to be risen to that level where, first of all, adopting things should not be a hitch. That is the biggest learned lessons that we have to do. And there is a lot to do, and we have been doing at the, one more important is we have now, with the advent of renewables, we have to think aloud, and a lot of reforms are required. Basically, first of all, we have to be ready for accepting these renewables, and market and renewables will definitely be considering that they have to compete with the conventional. Looking forward for always concessions is not the right way, but both have to come. The renewables also have to be competitive, and the market systems and processes also have to be make it facilitative. So both now we have to move faster from the regulatory regime to market regime, and both have to go up. And Government of India and CRC also have been contemplating many processes and reforms. So we are eagerly waiting for such systems, and everybody should be ready. And many processes like ancillaries and all are being contemplated. So we are eagerly looking forward for reforms, and I only say that states have to take a leap forward and come ahead. That's the very small message which I would like to say, community. Thanks for giving the opportunity for ISGF, and it was a pleasure listening to such an expert from Europe. So I'm not taking individual names, but it is marvelous from listening since morning. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Baba, and you, of course, stuck to the time, what was requested. Thanks very much for sharing your views. Now I'd request Mr. Matthew David Wittgenstein, who's the Chief of Energy Connectivity Section on UN SCAP, to say whatever he would like to say in terms of either interconnections or markets.
Thank you very much. I do have a few slides. If it's okay, I'll just share my screen. I know the time is short, so I promise I will keep it tight. Right. Please let me know if you have any trouble seeing this. Are you seeing?
Yes, we are. Yeah.
Okay, great. So as was already stated, I'm Matthew Wittgenstein. I'm Chief of Section for Energy Connectivity at UN SCAP. I have 4 slides. I'll go through the first 2 very quickly because I don't think they add too much new to things to the conversation. But for those of you who don't know SCAP as an institution, we are one of 5 UN regional commissions, one of 5 regional hubs, looking at helping our member states collaborate to meet really a host of challenges, but in particular implementation of the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. SCAP is the largest commission. We have 53 member countries, 9 associate member countries. We cover everything as far west as Turkey and as far east as the Pacific Islands. So we do a lot of work on connectivity, and I wanted to sort of quickly say why, but really a lot of the messages here have already been stated very well by previous speakers, so I don't think I need to add too much. We see connectivity as a key strategy for helping countries meet sustainability goals, in particular the rapid decarbonization of the energy system that we know we need to do in order to meet Paris Agreement targets. We know we need to do this, but at the same time, we need to make sure that energy systems are affordable and secure. This is already highlighted earlier as the energy trilemma. And in our view, connectivity is a key tool that makes it easier to balance the various trade-offs between those 3 elements: affordability, security, and sustainability. So the question here today is how? How can connectivity be implemented in the countries in question, in the region in question, in order to help all the countries meet their goals while also accelerating those goals and working together to do so? So first, let me start by talking about what SCAP actually does on this. I'm not going to highlight everything, but I will highlight a few things. First, we have an expert working group on energy connectivity, which is made up of experts nominated by all of our member states. And mainly we focus on Asia as a continent. I mentioned the Pacific Islands. I won't get into the details of connectivity work there. We do have ideas for what that means, but we're really focusing mainly on power grid connectivity, as it's been discussed here today. So of course, in the Pacific Island context, that makes less sense, but in the context of South Asia, Southeast Asia, West Asia, or Central Asia, Northeast Asia, all areas that we work on, lots of borders are shared, lots of opportunities to collaborate, but the question is how? And in SCAP context, this expert working group is a way in which we can bring people together to present ideas, present challenges they're trying to overcome, and also try to inform SCAP's work. Through the expert working group, we've drafted a regional roadmap on power system connectivity. And this is one thing I really wanted to emphasize because it's in SCAP's view, and I should say it's still draft. We're still working through the process of getting our member states to approve it, but the document is available on our website and I think is pretty close to being finalized. And in this document, we highlight 9 strategies, which I'd roughly break down into 4 categories. Strategies for addressing planning, such as the need to develop regional master plans. You heard the ENSO-E work being done earlier in the European context. We need something very similar in an Asia context. The challenge is how. As a starting point, we think we need to do more coordination of transmission planning. Again, here we're seeing bits and pieces, lots of bilateral work, or maybe work being done in an ASEAN context, which you'll hear more about later, which is great, but how do we expand that, build on that, and sort of use that as a tool for supporting more connectivity development. In terms of development, how do we mobilize investment? So again, you heard great examples in the European context of how they're supporting cross-border power system integration through grants and other funding mechanisms. There's no equivalent to that in an Asia context. We need to think about financing mechanisms. We need to think about how do we actually pay for the infrastructure that we need to interconnect countries that are currently separate, or increase connectivity between countries that are currently only limited in their interconnections. And then there's trading and operations. Again, your great examples in the European context. How do we move towards multilateral trading in an Asia context? Lots of bilateral trading going on. You heard about those in the earlier presentations that started the session. But multilateral trading, as you heard in the European context, requires lots of harmonization, lots of rules development, lots of allocation of responsibilities. And how do you do that in a country, when sets of countries have very different market structures, very different policy environments, very different policy goals? Similarly, we need to talk about coordination of system operations. That's really critical when it comes to the security elements, when it comes to the efficiency, where you need to make sure the system operators are working together so that they can coordinate with each other in a way that improves everyone's system operations and doesn't work across purposes. And then there are some cross-cutting elements, which you've heard sort of hinted at, but I think really need to be emphasized. We need political trust and consensus to make this move forward. Cross-border power system integration is one of the few areas in electricity where we need to have politics align along with the technical issues. So you see in the European context, great work being done there, fantastic work being done in the Asia context, in ASEAN, in South Asia, in the GCC countries you heard of before, but how do we bring it all together in a political context? This is where SCAP, I think, plays a strong role, and hopefully will play a stronger role in the future. And this can be supported, for example, through the development of intergovernmental agreements or capacity building. And then finally, we really need to make sure that everything we're doing is consistent with the Sustainable Development Goals, in particular, the deployment of renewables. And I also wanted to highlight, in an SCAP context, we are doing work at a sub-regional level. We're doing work right now in ASEAN with our partners, the ASEAN Center for Energy, who you'll hear from later, on regulator training. And we did a study looking at the potential for connectivity in Northeast Asia, a region of very different countries, very different levels of interconnectivity. I have the link here. I'm happy to have you all take a look at it in your own time, but it builds off of those strategies to talk about how you can actually take these high-level strategies and try to apply them in a sub-regional context. Okay, finally, what are some key takeaways, recommendations that I would bring forward for this audience to try to accelerate what I think is a really worthwhile endeavor, increasing connectivity in the Asia region? One thing I would say to start with is institutional support is critical. If you look at all the successful integration projects, ones you've heard about or will hear about in Europe, North America, obviously lots going on there, Southeast Asia, ASEAN, South Asia, as we've already discussed, there are regional institutions in place that are supporting the work. So one critical question is, how do the regions that have these institutions work together? So we mentioned South Asia and Southeast Asia, right? You have different institutional arrangements, different intergovernmental arrangements, but when we bring the two together, how do we harmonize? How do we collaborate? What's the overarching mechanism that will allow these different regions to actually trade power together in an efficient and coordinated way? I think there's real opportunities here to explore broader institutional arrangements, collaborative arrangements between institutions, but we need to discuss that at a starting point in order to get things to move forward as we need them to. Second, we really need to ensure that connectivity is aligned with policy goals. You know, connectivity, as I said before, it's a tool. It's not a goal in and of itself, but a thing that can help us meet the goals that we have. So we need to make sure that when we do these connectivity projects, we are explicitly linking them to decarbonization efforts, sustainability goals, coordinating on renewable energy deployment and development, right? So share plans, allocate resources across borders. Don't just focus only on what you can do within your country's borders, but ask the question, what can we do with our neighbors? That requires some planning and coordination at a high level. So when the deployment actually happens, it happens efficiently, taking advantage of resources where they are, not necessarily where we would like them to be, because the wind blows where it blows, the sun shines where it shines, not exactly where we need it in any given moment of the day. We've heard this already, but it's worth emphasizing. Coordination is key for connectivity to work efficiently. And then security is a concern, which I've heard bits and pieces of today, but I really wanted to emphasize, when I talk to our member states about what their main concerns are when it comes to connectivity, the first question I usually will get is, how do we ensure connectivity doesn't come at the expense of our security? And I really don't think that connectivity is supportive of security goals, but it is not inherently so unless we actively collaborate, and unless we take advantage of increased diversity of resources, but also increased diversity of interconnections. One line between two countries is not sufficient to ensure actual security between those countries. It's better than nothing, but if you really want security, you need diversity, not just in terms of resources, but in terms of interlinkages as well. Finally, let's be ambitious. Let's work together to take advantage of the fact that what connectivity does is it allows us to go farther by working together. And this is, I think, something we've heard already many times today. The ambition is there, but it needs to be linked to connectivity so that when connectivity comes into play, it's to help us accelerate where we want to go to, not just meeting the plans that have already been set before us. That's really it. I think I'm done with my time. So I want to thank you for the opportunity. If there are questions later, very happy to answer them. But in the meantime, really have appreciated the opportunity and love the conversation so far. Thank you again.
Thank you, Matthew. I think you've raised a critical issue in terms of security. If you have collaboration, that's the thing with human relations also, and so with other countries, between countries. I think the next speaker, Mr. Mohammad Hussain, who's a good friend of mine. He's Director General of the Power Cell in Bangladesh Power Development Board. He can answer that because Bangladesh is importing about 1,000 megawatts of power from India. So what does he think about it? But I feel that in general, if there's if there's a fair deal for both the countries, there's a win-win situation for both the countries or all the countries, then it's likely to be sustainable. So I'd request Mr. Mohammad Hussain to give his views for another 4 minutes or 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Pankaj Bhatta, my very good friend, and nice to see you. And I can see most of my old friends in this audience. In fact, I have been listening carefully since 3:30 in the inaugural session. Mrityunjay was, in fact, a co-chair of my steering committee last time. So we enjoyed his lecture, and just my immediate past presenter, Matthew, he was referring this roadmap for regional roadmap for connectivity. I had the opportunity to chair the second session, and we have discussed this roadmap in that session of SCAP, and that has been finalized. Now it's waiting for the vetting of the member states. So I feel happy that it's now rolling on. And I was also listening to the presentation of Mr. Pankaj Bhatta, and it was very nice. I have not so many things to discuss, as Mr. Bhatta was asking me regarding our this connectivity, particularly in I think all of you know that Bangladesh is having now cross-border interconnection with India, and we are importing 1,116 megawatt with two interconnections. One is Baharampur of West Bengal, and then Beramara of Bangladesh is having, in fact, one 400 kV SBDC link, and another one is also being already, in fact, have been built, and so it has a capacity of another 1,000 megawatt, and we are having radial mode interconnection between Tripura and the Kumilla of Bangladesh. But the most discussed issue is that the real interconnection, which is particularly this is Katihar, Parbatipur, and Bornagar 765 kV is a super highway interconnection. Basically, will connect the northeastern region to eastern region, and having a tapping point in Parbatipur. So, in fact, you know that we had a stand committee last month, and we have decided that a joint committee would work to undergo some due diligence and also to proceed further. I think this will, if this could be built, it could connect not only these two friendly countries, also at one part the Nepal and other in the Bhutan. And we are also in collaboration with Nepal. We have almost finalized one deal with GMR's hydropower plant. You know that they are developing one 500 megawatt we are going to import. And also we are expecting that we'll have a tripartite collaboration among these three countries, India, Bangladesh, and Bhutan. So this is very important, and I was in fact following the presentation of Mr. Pankaj, and while he was showing the probable interconnection, definitely we can integrate our SAARC countries as well as with ASEAN. When we think for ASEAN interconnection, I think if it could integrate more states, that would be more countries, that would be nice. So the possible two options, one is from India to Myanmar, another is from India through Bangladesh and Myanmar. I believe that the more countries we can integrate, more more it will make sense, and I think widen the cooperation. So I would rather request Mr. Pankaj to rather promote the second option, that will help all of us. Regarding the harmonization of the grid and others, I think I always try to refer this SARI program where Mr. Pankaj is also involved. They have done a lot of, I think, background work, and they have made the foundation. So I think based on that, we can work on it, and this would not be a problem for integrating our interconnection. And regarding the cross-border trade, I always say that the IEX or the Indian Power Exchange is now within the states, and it can easily spread within the region, and that can work nicely for the electricity trade within the countries. I have not much to say, and I can only say that I think this platform will be very much helpful for further sharing our information and strengthening the cooperation in future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hussain. It is nice to listen to you and to also know that you would like more countries to be connected. So we would, of course, go with that option, which benefits more and more countries, or at least encourage that. And of course, maybe you know about it, that the procedure for approval for trading within India has been approved recently on 26th February. The order has come out. So let's hope that this will take things forward. Thank you very much for your views, and nice to hear that as always. I now request Ujjwal Deep Dahal, who's the Director General of Druk Holdings and Investments Bhutan. Is he there? Because I don't see him in the participants. Shubham, are you there, Ujjwal Deep Dahal? Well, if he's not there, then we'll go to the next person, which is Ben Suryadi, Manager Policy Research and Analytics, the ASEAN Center of Energy. I'm sure Ben Suryadi is there. Yes, please go ahead, Ben. We'd like to listen to you on whatever side you would like to talk on both sides, whether it's the feasibility of interconnection or the market design. Yeah, please go ahead.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Pankaj Batra. That's going to be, I'm Benny Suryadi from the ASEAN Center for Energy. I understand that I have 5 minutes to share some information from our side. So for that, allow me to make a short presentation. I have a few slides to be presented to the audience. But I hope my slide is visible now.
It says it started screen sharing. Maybe it's taking some time. Yeah, it's come. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so okay. Yeah, so this yeah, short introduction. I'm representing the ASEAN Center for Energy. So this is an intergovernmental organization working on the interests of the 10 countries in Southeast Asia region on the energy cooperation. So we are the intergovernmental organization. As we are working on the energy issue.
Excuse me, Benny.
Yeah.
Your bandwidth is. I think there's a little bit connectivity problem. So if you switch on your video, maybe it may become better.
Okay, let me try it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, okay. This is about the ACE, the institution that we are presenting in. We are working with the 10 countries in ASEAN. As you aware that the 10 countries is of course also 10 different economic profiles, 10 different energy resource, 10 different energy policy, 10 different market structures. So as we are talking about the interconnection, harmonization between the countries, as previous speaker mentioned, that it is good to involve more countries to be part of this one. But when you are involving more countries, also more issues that you need to address collectively, because every country has its own interests. But as a regional level, that we aim to pursue a regional integration in the Southeast Asia region for many reasons, which already also being mentioned by excellent speakers previously. But one point of view that I'd like to share on this perspective is on having more renewable energy into our integrated power system in Southeast Asia. So if the country is looking at their power development plan individually, then by 2025, we are going to have is only around 25 of renewable energy coming, renewable energy to generating the electricity in 2025. However, the ASEAN region collectively are already targeting to have a 30% of renewable energy in its installed capacity by 2025. So how we do this? The one way to do is to have a more integration, has a lot of resource on renewable energy. For example, Laos with its high hydrogen, high demand but lack of resource on renewable energy. Then that's where we see that if the countries of the region want to have a more renewable energy in their power system, the one way to do is to having more integrated studies. We have a lot of resource potential on the solar and wind, which can be utilized to replace fossil fuels and to fulfill the target on renewable energy on the region. So that's how we work in the ASEAN, looking for more interconnection, even though the geographical is very, very challenging. But then this effort is being translated under what we call it ASEAN Power Grid. There are 16 existing and ongoing to be developed interconnection project that we have so far. There's around 7,000 megawatt existing, but in aim for the next 10 years to achieve the 30 gigawatts of interconnection. And I'm happy to inform you also that currently we are ongoing study, the ASEAN Interconnection Master Plan Study, M3, that will be released this year, that addressing more multilateral interconnection with a higher penetration of renewable energy. Again, having interconnection is very, very challenging, but one good example that we can present how we move from the bilateral into the multilateral is through this, what we call it, Laos, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore Power Interconnection projects. We started in 2017 with the Energy Purchase and Wheeling Agreement between EDL, EGAT, and TNB. for 2 years, and then in these 2 years, there are 30 gigawatts of electricity has been traded, and then is being expanded to up to 30 megawatt. And then recently, that's also from 3 countries moved to the 4 countries by inclusion of the Singapore with one-way flow up to 100 megawatt of electricity from Brazier, from Laos to the Singapore through the Thailand and Malaysia. And then that is being expanded to all of the 10 countries, and also possibility to have with India, Bangladesh, and China. So this is my short presentation about what we do on the interconnection in ASEAN. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Benny, for your views and the efforts that you all are making for interconnecting 10 nations in the ASEAN region. It's a gradual process. I know it takes some time, but I'm sure with the way you all are doing, it'll keep on. It'll happen over a period of time. Thank you. Now I'd request Mr. S.K. Suni, who's present, who's advisor POSOCO and ex-CEO of POSOCO, with a wealth of experience in the field of system operation and system studies, to give his views on both sides, if you'd like to, on the feasibility study for interconnections as well as market design.
Thank you, Mr. Pankaj. Thank you, ISGF, ISUW, for this opportunity. I hope you are able to hear me. Yeah, and I echo the sentiments of previous speakers. It has been real good learning, and I would, not talk about the detailing of model or market, because there are super specialists who are speaking on it. But India has seen the advantages of interconnection. We are reaping full benefits out of it. And it's a least regret investment. And it's not only causing, reliable supply or security of power or economy, but it eradicates poverty, brings solidarity, and keeps the environmental benign and makes the war obsolete, is what philosopher engineers have said so. Now, interconnecting the grid is one of the simplest, cheapest solution. And here comes my 2 cents. All the models and the feasibility studies which are carried out do capture, major things of economics and technical part of it. But there are many, many intangible things which I feel should be factored, and they value a lot, and particular to a system operators and the market operators. So those are actually the high impact, low probability events, and the links act as the best insurance. It levelizes all kinds of risk and uncertainties. These are certain things which very seldom factored in the model, and but they have to be valued a lot. And you realize only when you are in trouble that if you are holding the hand of a neighbor's grid, it can come to your rescue, and you can also do the same thing on the other side. Before smart grid, strong grid is always a smart grid. Before you make it smart, make it strong. So strong interconnections are absolutely essential if you want economy, if you want resilience, if you want reliability, if you want economies of scale, anything which you talk about. And then if economy has to take place, it could automatically take you towards market for better price discovery and other things. And I would only pick up the threads from our previous speakers, very nicely explained. For an interconnection, engineers would like to design a sophisticated link. Economists would like to have a robust price discovery. Lawyers will write elaborate contracts, but none of them would succeed unless you have a sustainable institutional mechanism and governance. And that's more important as far as the cross-border is concerned. I would not take much time. I would like to listen to others, but I would say that a very strong grid in South Asia, or for that matter, OSOWOG, has to happen. It's a matter of time, because technology will come to our rescue. The pressures for environment will come to our help, and grid has to expand. There is absolutely no chance, no doubt about it. And the next generation will also realize what more they can derive out of these cooperations. Political consensus, if it is once reached, then rest will automatically fall in line. And plethora of literature is available elsewhere. And why only electricity? In other fields also. And technically it's doable. It's not impossible to handle such things. Where I only would conclude by saying that 20 years back, when we thought that India will become one grid, when at that time there were 40 grids in India, we were ridiculed that how can you do so much of investment, so much of difficulties. But today India is one grid. So same would happen with our neighbors, and we would have the same frequency as Singapore very shortly. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Suni, for giving a overall perspective and more philosophical perspective. So that's it's always nice to hear you. And as you've seen the grids getting integrated into a single grid in India, and now into getting connected or getting integrated with the other South Asian nations, and hopefully later with West Asia and Southeast Asia. Let us hope that we get to see this in the next few years. Thank you. Now, I think Rajiv Mishra, I don't see him here, or he's the next speaker, but I don't see him in this participants list. So is Rajiv Mishra there? If he's
Sir, Rajiv sir couldn't join due to some urgent meeting. Okay. So we can move forward with the next speaker, Mr. Akhilu Rahman. Akhilu sir has sent across a presentation, which if sir permits, I would like to present on his behalf, or maybe sir, you want to share your screen?
I can. Yeah, thank you. I can share my screen so that I can make it a bit fast.
Sure, sir.
Okay, thank you.
The navigation.
Rahman, who is Chief Technology Officer of Hitachi ABB Power Grid. So I'm sure we listened to some of the feasible interconnections. Right, please go ahead.
Okay, so hope you can see my screen.
Yes, yes.
Yes, sir, we can see your screen.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you, Mr. Batra, for the introduction, and also it was very good listening to experts, leaders from different regions, including European Union and also other parts of the South Asian region. So I would not like to repeat the things. I think it has been said how we are envisioning, one sun, one world, and one grid, and also especially looking at how we can do it in the South Asian region. I would like to address maybe very briefly about how do we achieve this? What kind of technologies and solutions are there we are using today, and how it is evolving to make it really to fulfill our vision of interconnected grid in the region. So just to refresh that, we are talking about how the renewable penetration is sort of taking shape in different countries, different regions, and we are also having distributed energy, in addition to the share of energy by wire, we call it distributed energy resources. We are talking about also electric vehicles, electric mobility coming into the grid, which will pose different type of challenges while giving a lot of opportunities for us to be more greener. And of course, we are talking about decarbonization, decentralization, bidirectional flows between among the grids. And so in future, we are going to have, having implemented all these solutions, I think we are seeing that increasingly that new business models are evolving. not only for the operators but also the technology providers, and also we have learned about how the energy exchange, the market is also shaping up. We are also talking about, I think, in addition to a strong power electric grid, and also how we can have the data transferred through Internet of Energy, which will enable us to achieve a lot of characteristics and also functionalities required for the interconnected grid. Real-time control and of course cyber security, very important as we increasingly getting interconnected, and also usage of IT and digital solutions, I think, is very important. And of course, how do we make the prediction better? Prediction of the load demand, prediction of the generation, and also can we make some of the operations autonomous, because it's as we are growing with more and more systems interconnected, I think it's not possible to have human intervention. It has to be autonomous in some areas. And so we'll be moving from central predictable generation to the more volatile and distributed generation. We talked about predictable consumption to flexible prosumers. We are talking about at the receiving end, in the distribution side, where we have prosumers, not only consumers, they will also produce energy, and how that can be also integrated into the grid, and which is again connected with regional grids. Inertia, reserves, predictable short circuit conditions. So these are the challenges we are seeing, and it is moving towards that. And it is not just electricity grid we are talking about system of electricity systems. And also, it's not just the power system. We are talking about sector coupled energy system, including we are talking about how we can use different forms of energy storage, hydrogen energy, and of course battery energy storage. And as we grow with interconnection, I think it's not just the fault prevention and avoidance, but I think it also has to be proactive and predictive fault management. And there we have to use the technologies, the evolving algorithms, which can really make it more stronger. And so if we look at our core power system, the grid, it has been there for several decades with all the different type of equipment, the sensors, the actuators, controllers, the system in terms of SCADA, energy management system, network control, market management system. So it has been there for several decades. It has been running well, and also we are seeing a good example how our country is having one grid now, connecting all different diverse sources of energy at the same time, also diverse load pattern. So now what we can do is actually extend this also with IoT digitalization, not disturbing the automatic control, the autonomous control, what we are going to do in our conventional core technology systems, but also take the data to the cloud and IoT concept, where we can combine this data about the loads, about the generation, about the consumer behavior patterns, market demand and market management system, energy trading, and make it more efficient, more predictable, and using all these digital technologies. I think it's also important how we can keep our assets in a better condition, more healthy conditions, and also ensuring that they are running, they are operating in a life cycle mode with life cycle cost reduction. And there we see that once we have this digital technologies there, whether we are talking about software defined machines like digital twin, Mr. Batra, you talked about how you have simulated the regional grids. I think how that can be also done in a dynamic condition when the grid is already operating. How do you simulate proactively? And we are also increasingly using the machine learning algorithms, artificial intelligence algorithm, by which we can have better prediction of the operation of the grid, prediction of the health of the assets, so that we can take proactive action to service them, to maintain them. And of course, with this, we are getting a lot of big data. And that data actually can help us in better and better prediction, and it will also avoid surprises in the system as we grow bigger with the network systems. with different countries. And that will also give us leveraging factor in terms of monitoring the system and doing the analytics, predictive analytics, whether it is cyber security, whether it is system health and asset health, and things like blockchain we are talking about, where we are we have started using also in the energy market, where prosumers, they also can sell energy to the other prosumers, consumers, to the grid, and increasingly also going to use the connectivity, for example, 5G and all, how it can be also used to make the forecasting, the monitoring, control more secured, strong, as well as predictable. So I think to sum up, it's all about the conventional system growing with the network systems, and also with all the digital and automation technologies on top of it, we can really achieve definitely increased productivity, reliability of the system, and also quality of power, at the same time having the sustainability and also safety of our people, and while maintaining the security, the cyber security of the system. So this is what I just wanted to touch upon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Akilur Rahman. Yeah, you did speak about the technology side of things, for seeing that there's reliable transmission and optimization, including of distributed generation and offtake from that. Thank you for the information.
My pleasure.
I think there are two people, Eddie Vidiono from Indonesia, ex-president PTPLN and founder PJCI, as well as Mr. Zairul Anfin, who's director Smart Grids, again from Indonesia. Both of them are not there, I think. I don't see them. Can you confirm, Shivam?
Sir, yes, they're not here, so we can directly jump to Mr. Yashuro Kaku.
Right.
So,
is it because of the floods in Indonesia recently?
So could be because Zainal sir had joined a while back, but he told me that he was having some issues with respect to his internet connectivity.
Okay, okay. So I hope they are safe, and so are their dear ones. Okay, we'll go to Mr. Yashiro Kaku, Director METI and Country Head NIDO. Please go ahead and give your views, Mr. Kaku.
Good afternoon. Do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Hello, good afternoon to all. Thank you, Mr. Batra. I feel very honored to share and present my ideas with experts of many countries on such an important topic. I'm Shiro Kaku, Chief Representative, NEDO New Delhi office. To begin with, let me explain about NEDO briefly. NEDO is a Japanese government-funded organization that has implemented demonstration projects in India and around the world using green and reliable Japanese technology. The topic of this roundtable is the international connection of power lines. And I like to comment based on the situation in Japan. As you know, Japan is an island country, and its power lines are not connected to foreign countries. Therefore, this is a very important premise in considering Japan's energy policy and energy security and energy mix and its difficulties. On the other hand, I hear in Europe, each country has its own energy mix to best suited to geographical conditions and its history of its energy policies. But in Europe, the international connection of power lines enables flexible power supply by making it possible for one country to introduce a large amount of renewable energy and to utilize baseload power sources from other countries as balancing power source. In this background, I like to approach efforts by India and SAARC countries to link power lines. This is a very important topic, and I'm quite interested in it. Here, I like to introduce technologies developed by a Japanese company for the construction of cross-border power lines. The technology is low-loss overhead conductor developed by Sumitomo Electric. I show the picture of the, sorry, it's not a digital solutions. I would like to show the pictures. The long distance transmission lines, such as international connection lines, are used for a long time once they are constructed and have long transmission distances. In addition, it's desirable to use overhead conductor that can accommodate future demand fluctuations and increase capacity. It's also important to utilize power lines that have a conductivity as high as possible and can reduce transmission losses. Sumitomo Electric's energy-saving conductor has excellent reliability and durability, and it's already in use around the world, including India and Japan. Even if the initial cost increases, it's superior in the long-term total cost because
Mr.
of the
Kant, can
energy
you hold
saving
it up? Can you hold up the picture properly, because I don't think we're able to see it.
Sorry about that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
So it's a Sumitomo Electric energy saving conductor. Therefore, I like to introduce the technology of Japan and Japanese companies like Sumitomo Electric and Hitachi, which Mr. Lama introduced, that can contribute to the reliability and the better operability of the international connection of transmission lines. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It's nice to get to know about new technologies in the field of transmission. Shubham, who's the next person? I seem to have lost that screen. Where?
So the next speaker is Mr. Marut Pitaya Chawal, who's the chief of regional trading team.
I got it. Yes. Yeah. Mr. Marut Pitaya Chawal, who's the regional trading team, chief of regional trading team in IGAT. Please go ahead. That's the Energy Generating Authority of Thailand. Yeah, please go ahead.
Mr. Marut, you're on mute. Maybe if you can unmute.
Mr. Marut, can you hear us? You're on mute. You'll have to unmute yourself. I'm not sure if he's able to hear. Mr. Marut? We will take him and then later if you're able to send a mail to him in the meantime. Sure. We'll go to the next speaker then.
So we also have Ruchakrit and Visarut from IGAT. So maybe if they can come in. Yep.
Okay, we'll take them then. Mr. Ruchakrit Ramayana, who is the head of transmission system business development section of IGAT. Please give your views. Could you please give your views? You're also muted.
Hello, good morning. Good evening.
Yeah, we can hear you now. Please go ahead.
Actually, we prepare to participate today at this evening, but not much information, but to update what IGAT is try to do the interconnection with our neighbor.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. So from now we are in the active discussion and ongoing in the policy in the government discussion between Thailand government and Myanmar government, and also the Thailand government and Cambodia government to to have interconnection. As you can see from our previous speaker about the ASEAN grid. We also try to do LTM, which is already successful, and also we gonna increase to like 300 megawatt transmission from Laos to Myanmar to Malaysia. But for the time being, the market is hard to establish, but is demand drive first for the bilateral agreement to have to be set up first. So we are try hardly to by our Thai government and also our neighbor to establish the interconnection. So that I mentioned earlier. So we are on active discussion with our neighbor, Myanmar and Cambodia lately. That's my sharing information for now. Hello.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Now there's another gentleman, Mr. Visaut Yutachai from IGAT, looking after energy storage. So we'd like your views also on.
Oh no. My name is Marut. Mr. Marut and Mr. Rashakit is I think not available to talk. So I'm talking on behalf of IGAT.
Sorry, you.
My name is Visarut Yutachai. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I said. Okay, yeah. Please go ahead.
That's all information that we are sharing for this evening.
Okay.
Okay.
Right. Then there's another gentleman.
So that's all the speakers that we had today with us for the session. So maybe if you can just sum up, and if we have any questions, we can take up questions for the next 10 minutes, and then we can close the session.
Okay. Do we don't have the gentleman from Vietnam?
No, sir. He was there, but he had to leave. So I think he's not. I mean, he's not here anymore. I don't see him in the panel.
Okay. Right. So it was nice to hear different views from different people from different countries, and of course the efforts. Mr. Baba spoke about the internal systems and processes that need to be streamlined to have more of cross-border trade in electricity. Matthew David Dinstein, the chief of energy connectivity section UNESCAP, talked about if we can get the security through active security of supply through active collaboration. And of course, the dilemma of how much to depend on other nations for this, in case there is a break of relationship. Yeah. So as I said, these are things which it's like a double-edged sword, but that's for any human relationship. So it's a thing where if it's a win-win situation for both, it would work. And Mr. Mohammed Hussain was very positive about who was a DG Power Cell in Bangladesh. He was very positive about building relationships with all the countries to form a regional grid or to interconnect regional grids. And he wanted Bangladesh also to be part of the transmission system to the Southeast Asia. And Mr. Ujjwal Deep Dahal, Oh, he was not there, I think. Benny Suryadi spoke about the efforts that they were doing for interconnecting. Mr. Suni, advisor Posoko, spoke about bringing solidarity. I mean, that's being one of the benefits other than just normal financial benefits. So he's spoken an overall philosophy of interconnections and relationships. Mr. Akilur Rahman, Chief Technology Officer, Hitachi, spoke about the technology side of things of transmission as well as distribution and distributed generation, including smart grid. Mr. Kaku spoke about the head of NIDO, spoke about the technology, advanced technology in Japan in conductors, which are also being used in India. And Mr. Visarat from IGAT spoke of that active discussion with Myanmar and Malaysia and to export power if that works out. So I think in general it was views of different sections or different countries in the Southeast, the West Asia, South Asia, and Southeast Asia connections. I'm sure that that all people who've been a part of the panel discussion have benefited from the views which have been shared by all. I think it's platforms like this that work actually towards informal relationships to take regional cooperation forward. And as was said by, I think, Matthew, that these are things where knowledge sharing or platforms and other platforms like this take things forward on regional cooperation. So let's hope that this will take one more step towards interconnecting the grids, which has been talked about for a long time. I know it does take time to build interconnections. There is, of course, talk of Sri Lanka getting connected to India, but which would take a few years because building the interconnection across the sea would take at least 3 years. So, it's one step in that direction, and I'm sure that there'll be many more steps. And ISGF has first taken a lead in propagating the idea of interconnection of West Asia, South Asia, and Southeast Asia, and has been doing it every year as one session. This time the session has got upgraded to almost the session on the first date, almost. So it shows the priority that is being attached by all the governments. And we of course learned a lot from the European how it has evolved. The European the ENSO, the European network of transmission system operators in electricity. We've gained a lot from all of them. So thanks to them also, and I think it's let us hope that this session would continue each year by ISGF, and many more platforms also discuss this, because ultimately I think it's a it's a thing where depending on one another is going to lead, as Sunisab said, on to comradeship, and it brings solidarity of all the nations. So as you get bigger and bigger in interconnections, there is more and more solidarity within this world. So thank you very much, and hopefully less of conflicts and more of friendship and cooperation. Thank you very much for all the panelists, to all the panelists who have been here and gave their valuable views. Thank you very much again. Thank you.
Thank you too.
Thank you everyone for joining
Thank
us.
you.
Thank you, Batra Sahab, and nice discussions. Thanks.
Thank you, Baba. Thank you.
Thank you everyone. Have a good day.
Bye bye.